Beneath the shadow of looming cliffs that scraped the bruised sky of Novathulum and the sprawling, sun-baked plains owned by ancient power, existence began for Tacitus, woven into the very fabric of servitude to House Calgar. It was a path walked without grandeur or consent, a tightrope strung over an abyss of quiet obligation measured in endless labor and lowered gazes, where the immutable birthright of station clung like the grit beneath a serf's fingernails. Yet even as a child, Tacitus's eyes persistently strayed towards the heavens, a silent ache pulling his gaze upwards where cold stars glittered with a promise he couldn't articulate. The vast estate grounds and fields, dangerously expansive to others, felt like a cage to him, its boundaries rigidly defined by the high, unforgiving stone walls of Calgar dominion. In those stolen moments of solitude, a persistent, quiet thought would surface. Was this all, this unending rhythm of toil under a foreign sky, or did something vaster, more terrifyingly alive, await him somewhere beyond? Yet Tacitus was not solitary in his yearning. Bonded to his side, inseparable despite the chasmic divide of blood and title, stood Marneus Calgar, the heir apparent, Destiny's own child. They were boys forged together the serf, and the lordling and the connection born between them seemed to dissolve the rigid lines society demanded, making the gulf of class a distant, almost irrelevant thing. Marneus, for all the crowns awaiting his brow, cared little for the rules sculpted by privilege. Meals were shared, trees were climbed with reckless abandon, conversations flowed unbidden, laying bare the ambitions that simmered within both young hearts. Tacitus often revisited these memories in the small hours after their adventures, when the great house slept, when only the rustling evening winds whispered secrets against his narrow windowpane. How profoundly strange, he would muse, to be born beneath the yoke, yet feel nothing inherently distinct, no barricade of soul between himself and the heir he served. Strip away the name Calgar, and was he not Tacitus just the same? Renounce the lineage, and Marneus might step easily into the worn clothes of servitude. "We are alike," Marneus would declare, sprawled on the grassy slopes overlooking the estate, the wind tugging at his hair, eyes fixed on a shared horizon. More alike than any would ever dare think, Tacitus would fervently agree within himself. He believed down to the marrow that together they could ascend beyond the shallow definitions that chained them both. The shared dream crystallized fierce and undeniable. Though for Tacitus it had transcended mere ambition, metastasizing into a visceral need. To become a space marine, Marneus would proclaim, eyes ablaze with a near-fanatic hope, it is to leave this entire world behind, to fight for the God Emperor, to shield the Imperium with your body. There exists nothing greater, Tacitus. Nothing. In these moments, Tacitus's spirit would soar, untethered, scaling the gravity well, escaping the net-tightening fields of Novathulum, the enclosing walls, the crushing weight of foretold futures. Deep within, resonating in his very skeleton, he felt it a place amongst the star-strewn void, a destiny where birth was irrelevant, washed clean by conquest and sacred purpose. Yet inevitably, the whisper of doubt slithered back in when silence embraced him. What if you are wrong? What if, despite this fierce belief scorching your soul, the serf blood pumping through you eternally chains you to this soil? Alone, truly alone beneath a vast, indifferent sky, he dared ask, by what right does a piece of property grasp for such immensity? But dawn always returned. The first pale light would spill across the plains, the house would stir, and Marneus would speak again of the void, of service, of escape. In every sunrise, Tacitus's personal flame of hope, momentarily doused, would flare defiantly back to life. Eventually, the dream demanded motion, shaping fractured hope into concrete, perilous action. Youth surrendered to disciplined growth, and both Tacitus and Marneus found favor selected as aspirants, walking the razor-edged path that leads towards becoming space marines, a path inevitably stained crimson by the blood of the unprepared and the unworthy. Few walked its length intact, but they walked it together, shoulders squared, strides unwavering, boarding the groaning transport that severed them from Novathulum, delivering them unto the unforgiving reality of Thulia Minor. There, the testing began without preamble. Crixus, a veteran space marine, grim fear solidified into scar tissue and war-steady hands, became their sculptors. He wasted no breath on pity, hurling them instantly into the crucible of endurance, strength, and profound willpower. Days stretched, agonizing and interminable, filled with backbreaking runs that left lungs raw, brutal drills that dissolved sinew, isolating exhaustion that gnawed at the edges of the spirit. Yet strangely, it was the nights that bore down hardest upon Tacitus. In the strained stillness of the dim barracks, as the camp settled into wary quiet, his thoughts inevitably drifted back to Novathulum's deceptive simplicity, to sunlight dappling courtyards they once sprinted through, when the dream was pure, unsullied potential. His gaze would often shift to Marneus, lying silent in the bunk beside him, wondering if the same corrosive uncertainty ever gnawed at his friend's inviolate core, for Marneus always seemed anchored by an unshakable certainty Tacitus strained to capture, a cold, hard knot of faith unfelt in his own soul. Still, Tacitin's determination held, a bedrock beneath the shifting sands of dread, to return now. To crawl back into the suffocating skin of a serf after tasting, even faintly, the possibility of transcendence. That would be the true, crippling death screaming. Yet, as months bled into one another, Tacitin perceived a shift. It was subtle at first, a strange flicker in Crixus's assessing glare, an unnatural, lingering stillness that crept over clusters of their fellow aspirants after evening mess, a silence that hung heavier than fatigue. He dismissed it initially, chalking it up to the cumulative weight of the ordeal, the grinding attrition on their minds. But the unease grew pervasive, undeniable. A tangible miasma of wrongness thickened the air in the echoing training halls, a dread anticipation Tacitin could palpate on his skin but couldn't yet name. One night, under a bloated, pale moon smeared across Thulia Minor's alien sky, Tacitin jolted awake, soaked in icy sweat. Driven by an unnamed, terrifying instinct, he slid silently from his bunk, ghosting through the chilled darkness of the encampment. Then sight froze the air in his lungs, a distant flicker, dancing unnaturally upon the stark stone of the distant training hall where only shadows should reside. His pulse hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of alarm. His legs moved with instinctive urgency before conscious thought could form. Drawing near the yawning doorway of the hall, the revelation struck him like a physical blow. Fires burned low, casting demonic leaps of light. Crixus stood large before a darkly unnatural altar, his massive hands slick and black in the dimness, but horribly, unmistakably crimson beneath the guttering light. Fresh blood. Surrounding him stood others, their faces mere aspirants yesterday, now twisted into alien sneers, eyes burning with an unnatural, ravenous glee that curdled Tacitin's gut. His mind clawed, struggling to comprehend the demon-sharp, visceral wrongness, until his horrified gaze locked onto the altar's surface. Deeply etched into the stone, pulsating faintly in the firelight, was the monstrous angular sigil, the mark of Khorne, the blood god. Comprehension crashed over Tacitin, an icy wave of betrayal. His mentor, the iron figure shaping his future, the servant of the emperor he'd sworn to emulate, was corrupted, fallen to chaos. And in his descent, he had dragged these souls down into damnation. The monstrous truth seized him, threatening to collapse his knees. Terror mingled with utter disbelief. Escape, warn Manus, warn the chapter. Now, the thoughts fired through his panicked mind like bolt shells. He spun on his heel, heart screaming for flight, only to freeze anew. A hand, cold and unyielding as stone, clamped onto his shoulder like a trap springing shut. He looked into the face of Manus, who had followed him silently into the hall. Reality fractured further. Manus had seen it too, the impossible, soul-shuddering horror unfolding mere paces away. The noble heir's face was slack, emptied of certainty, filled only with profound disbelief and silent, abject shock radiating like frost. "We must leave." Tacitin choked out the words into the suddenly dead air, the command sounding hollow, useless against the blasphemy before them. Movement was frantic thought, impossible action. But then the voice boomed, deeper, impossibly resonant, chilling the marrow. Crixus turned, those eyes no longer stern, but pools of engulfing, predatory madness. "You cannot leave," the corrupted monster growled, the sound vibrating the stones beneath their boots. "You belong to the blood god now, as we all belong." The cloying perfume of hot blood and billowing, cloying incense thickened the atmosphere into paste sucking at their lungs. As the possessed aspirants, the cultists they'd sweated beside, eaten beside, trained beside, detached from the shadows, moving inwards with brutal purpose, weapons glinting in the fire's unreliable glare, Tacitin knew with crushing finality. Their past was obliterated, the shared future dream extinguished like a guttered candle. Replacing it was the merciless truth of absolute betrayal, a chilling new reality forged in darkness and blood. Every sense amplified the drumming warbeat of his heart hammering inside his skull, the near-hysterical rhythm of his own breathing tearing at his throat. He stood rooted beside Manus near the sealed hall entrance, witnessing the ritual crackle further to hideous life. Time didn't accelerate. It stretched and warped into an excruciating eternity, trapping them in this abyssal snapshot. The air hung thick with the nauseatingly sweet metallic tang of gore, threading through noxious garlands of unseen, cloying incense. Crixus transformed utterly, paradise beyond a being they could recognize, raised hands glistening with viscous, dark fluids over that profane altar, features shifting demonically in the firelight, a malevolent gargoyle unearthed and animate. His voice resonated, guttural and primal. "You were never meant to witness consecration," Crixus growled, fiery gaze locking onto them, piercing the gloom. The flickering play of flames painted his expressions in shifting, impossible horror. "But it matters not. Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows, only that the rivers run deep." Tacitin choked, air refusing to enter his paralyzed lungs as terror bloomed cold and massive within his chest. They weren't intruders. They were sacrifices, discovered early witnesses, whose only path to silence was oblivion on that accursed altar. The other aspirants, comrades in suffering, now marionettes with minds sundered and reforged into vessels for bloodlust, snarling faces lit by the demon light, weren't brothers anymore. They were Kornite thralls, pure tools for feeding the unspeakable god. Run, this time. Tacitin's choked whisper carried the metallic tang of utter fear. His fingers dug desperately into Manus's arm, pulling with all his strength towards the heavy portal behind them, towards clean air and hope. His desperate lunge met crushing failure. The huge door slammed shut with the thunderous finality of a tomb ceiling, its heavy, echoing clang reverberating through bone, echoing the finality of their doom. The blank, impassive stone mocked escape. With terrifying speed, efficient and silent, the followers of Crixus advanced, blades and mauls raised efficiently, closing the shrinking space around them like noose tightening. The atmosphere thickened further, each gasp becoming punitive, gravel scraping raw lungs. Tacitin's consciousness sparked with frantic fury, darting desperately, seeking an exit, a flaw, some miracle weaponry left abandoned. Nothing, trapped utterly. The circle shrank, blades gleaming with foul intent, then movement flashed on his left. A sudden cry rupturing the silence, vibrant with defiance. Manus, his blade already unsheathed where had he drawn it so fast. His voice cracking the oppressive quiet, ringing with the fierce, unwavering determination Tacitin had recognized since the Novathulum hilltops. "We will not die like Grox penned for slaughter," he shouted into the monstrous air, the naked steel reflecting transient firelight. "For the God Emperor," the first cultist lunged low, snarling, a darting serpent strike, but Manus read it instantly. His blade moved incredibly fast, a streak of silver tracing an invisible arc. Contact brutal and final. Foul dark blood geysered across the worn gray stone, pooling thick and viscous in unseen cracks. For one brilliant, heart-stirring moment, fragile possibility flickered violently within Tacitin's chest, pure, dangerous, desperate hope. Survive, fight through, warn the Imperium, the flame sizzled bright. Then, obliteration. Crixus surged forward, not the steady mentor, but an avatar of slaughter unleashed. A terrible primal roar splitting the hall as his monstrous warrix cleaved upwards, catching the firelight wickedly on its chipped edge. His eyes held no calculation, only pure, ecstatic, unreasoning blood-madness. His strike defied speed, a hurricane-proportioned blur of destruction Tacitin's eyes could barely process, a scythe triggering pure flight instinct within his shuddering frame. Manus pivoted frantically, driven by raw courage, raising his own sword, muscles bunching with the frantic effort of parrying the unstoppable. Courage he possessed boundless, power honed by countless brutal shared drills, tactics learned from ancient battlefield wisdom. Or so they'd thought, but Crixus wasn't a teacher testing limits now. He was death incarnate, centuries of spilling blood aimed wholly at termination. The massive half descended. Impact. Thunderous beyond sound, concussion striking the ears physically. Manus met its centrosword, and his WE a PON Chinese letter, OR the noble aspiration at SYMBOLIZED Chinese letter EXPLODED into glittering shrapnel under the overwhelming titanic force. The sheer physical shockwave ripped his balance instantly. He crashed backwards like a ruined siege toy onto the unfeeling stone, wind and consciousness blasted completely out. An inhuman shriek ripped up Tacitin's throat, scorching vocal cords raw, NOO, an insect's protest against inevitable destruction. Already impotent, too late. The yellowweed cultists swarmed over Manus before the final fragments of his shattered weapon had even chimed on the cold floor. A dark mass of stabbing blades and crushing iron descended. Even prone and disarmed, Manus fought. A desperate, beautiful ferocity, pure space marine spirit blazing forth unaware its sparks were already doomed. He managed to strike back against the overwhelming tide, forged resilience meeting battle instinct. A relentless, agile kick snapping bone against one advancing foot soldier of horror. A desperate sweep of an arm deflecting a descending mace aimed at his skull. But the sheer, coordinated, rabid, unholy pound. Too many. Effortless. The chaos tide washed over and simply crushed the small resistance. Tacitin saw a brutal boot heel stomping down inexorably with sharp crack, on outstretched forearm guarding against killing blow. Another cultist plunging a jagged knife upward beneath hastily twisted ribs with a thick, wet sound. Instantly impossibly perilous wound after wound blooming brutally on that young, fiercely defiant body that mere minutes housed titan aspirations. Snatched motions from tidal violence flashing horror. Crimson shock explosions across torn tunic, an isolated boot striking vulnerable skull, savagely cracking like clay pottery, against rock floor from overhead position obscured suddenly by descending darkness inevitable. It was over before Tacitin's next frantic heartbeat after screaming. His world collapsed inward, telescoped violently to one fixed, impossible point on the dark-stained, impermanent stone Manus's body, broken beyond repair, motionless stillness against sudden red pool spreading intimately slow. All other sound dissolved into distance instantly. The grunts of the assailants, the low guttural mantras of their devotion, Crixus's heavy breathing, the mad crackling of illegal flames illuminating horrors all reduced to a meaningless, faded background drone. There was only the perfectly composed stillness within that unholy blister of light, marking precisely where his heart shattered entirely, and the hollow, inescapable agony eroding his body cavity minute by minute. Brother, in unwavering loyalty, shared past, shared dream incarnate weapon, extinguished violently, utter pointlessness replaced promise, breath ceased reaching lungs, muscles paralyzed entirely held barely upright only by shock combined with pure vibration ripping through framework. Time stretched infinitely elastic, tearing his awareness apart. Then something else ignited violently deep within that hollow void. Grief bottomless and profound, sharpening instantly into rage. Grief became merely the demanding fuel furnace for the explosive new reality consuming his universe. Rage, deeper than muscle than bone than nerve endings than starscape dreams ever were. Ancient, deep-seated volcanic rage surged upwards, impossible to contain. Grievance converted explosively. White heat detonation, obliterating morning impulse, forming not grief anymore, but consuming, devouring fire, replacing everything recognizable, eviscerated hope moments earlier. Feeling hate, profound, coherent, tougher than chaotic steel boiling, straight-up spine formations, coalesced beyond thought, origin regions unknown. Powerlessly lower vision, darkened, rushing blood shadows, reinforcing periphery, fading darkness, preceding tunnel, formatted awareness, converging solely letting targeting apparatus dawning, efficiently bridging conscious willing action category. Crucial comprehension punched actively through nerve clusters, overriding paralysis, instinct maintaining fight protocols. He could not allow conclusion defined by failure upon this altar. Marneus would become an eternal ignition furnace, powering imminent violent reaction. Vociferously shameful, provoking Manus death, established utterly inadequate traditional mourning patterns. Tacitus refused consciously every surrendered moment hence. This new structure, built around white-hot demand, forged exclusively organically within soul nucleus-defined single operational mode. Absolute destruction, raging outward, targeting perceived perpetrators, permanently territory, newly claimed. This rage vortex became stark battle armor, inexorable defended reality, replacing shattered optimism with manifest order, demanding blood equity imbalance, automatically defined existence henceforth. The memory dissolved, not fading but igniting, a spark in darkness becoming an inferno that consumed Tacitus's vision. He rose, the coiling tension in his limbs snapping taut, knuckles white bone against the worn leather hilt of his stolen sword. Below, oblivious in their unholy fervor, the cultists bent to their work, axes rising and falling with wet, rhythmic thuds that echoed the frantic drum of Tacitus's own heart. Their focus was their doom. In the crucible of that blood-stained cellar, the boy Tacitus ceased to exist. The drudge dreaming futilely of escape burned away in the white-hot forge of loss. What emerged was forged steel, cold, keen-edged, bereft of mercy. Fury ripped from his throat, a raw animal sound that echoed off the chill stone, and he was upon them. The blade, an extension of his rage, sang through the air with lethal grace. One cultist crumpled, a crimson fountain erupting where neck met shoulder, pooling thick and dark on the slimy flagstones. One by one, the followers of Khorne died screaming, Tacitus weaving through them like a wrathful specter. Every lunge, every parry, every killing stroke driven by a single flinthard thought. Manus would not be forgotten. His name would blaze brighter than any star, even if Tacitus had to carve it across the void itself with this very blade. They fell, a tide of broken meat and spilled faith, until the dreadful chamber held only Crixus. The traitor stood amidst the carnage, a brutal axe resting casually in his grip, blood-archened, a cruel mockery of a smile twisting his lips. "Think you can gut me, ditchborn runt?" Crixus spat, the contempt in his voice a physical thing, greasy and suffocating. "Think Khorne stirs for your pitiful bleeding? He drinks souls, boy, not the tears of whelps." Tacitus offered no retort, his silence a deeper, colder answer than any curse. The clangor of striking steel shattered the sudden quiet, blade meeting axe in a shower of sparks. Crixus possessed strength that mocked mortality, blows like falling masonry driving shockwaves up Tacitus's arms. Yet Tacitus fought not with mere muscle, but with the crushing weight of the vow anchored in his soul. His strikes were viper-fast, unnervingly precise, each arc of steel laden with the unshed tears of a dead boy and the immovable promise, Marneus Calgar lives. Sweat stung Tacitus's eyes, breath tore at his throat like sandpaper, muscles screamed beneath the skin, a litany of agony against Crixus's brutal onslaught. He could not yield, not while air still hissed in the traitor's lungs. As his strength ebbed dangerously, legs threatening to buckle, a shuddering weakness threatening to unmake his blade arm, the massive cellar doors exploded inwards. Not opened, but obliterated, shredded by relentless force. Light, harsh, clean, imperial light flooded the gore-slick darkness, preceding the cerulean giants who swept through the smoke and wreckage. Ultramarines, perfect in their cobalt armor, polished to a blinding gleam even in this hellhole, moving with a terrifying unity of purpose. Bolters roared, chainswords shrieked, and the few surviving cultists vanished in storms of Hycaliber fire and whirling adamantium teeth. Tacitin fell to his knees, the tremors of utter exhaustion racking his frame as the demigods of war reclaimed the hall. Their presence was absolute, an undeniable emanation of the Emperor's distant, implacable light piercing the deepest dark. Desperation flashed in Crixus's eyes, the cruel smile gone. He turned, the axe forgotten, scrambling for a shadowed corner like a cockroach fleeing daylight. He didn't make 3 steps. An Ultramarine, silent as the grave he represented, brought a crackling power fist down. The impact obliterated the traitor's spine, crumpling his form to the stone with a final, heavy wet sigh, an ignoble end. Finished. Yet relief was ash in Tacitin's mouth, the victory as hollow as the chasm inside him. Manus was dust, but his name was not. Trembling, Tacitin forced himself upright. He looked upon the still form of his friend, the face already cold beneath its mask of drying blood, and he made a vow, stealing the promise within the furnace of his soul. Manus Calgar's name would endure. The phantom stink of Thulia Minor's slaughterhouse cellar clung to Tacitin like gravesoot long after the guns fell silent, heavy and clinging as a shroud soaked in ice. Despite the leagues crossed, the transition between voidlands, the air on Macragge tasted stale with grief, the weight of the name he now wore Manus Calgar substantial as the ceramite of the warriors he now approached. His former existence, his birth name Tacitin, belonged to another life, a half-remembered dream already shredded by the harsh light of reality. The fortress monastery reared before him, an artificial mountain of adamantium and faith, its shadow cold and immense under Macragge's pale sun. The towering Ultramarines who waited near its gates, their auromitolase cerulean armor catching the light like chips of the firmament, were the same giants who had been his salvation as his strength bled out on Thulia Minor. They had offered the path he and Manus had once only whispered about in terrified hope. Yet when they lifted him from the carnage, his mind hadn't soared with possibility. It had remained locked on the sightless eyes of his friend, and the crushing, binding oath sealed with that stolen name. Here on the threshold of the Ultramarine's heart, poised to step onto the path he had claimed in that charnel house, his fingers reflexively tightened on the familiar grip of his blade. Its solid weight was an anchor in the shifting currents of this new reality. His pulse hammered not with apprehension, but with a fierce, almost painful thrum of anticipation. Pain and loss were the bloody footprints marking the road that led him here. But this fortress, this destiny was the altar where his desperate dream met brutal purpose. Beside him stood Captain Cato Sicarius, a figure etched in impossible discipline, his ornate golden-edged armor radiating an aura of uncomfortable, focused power. His face was a stern mask beneath the helmet rim, eyes like chips of glacial ice sweeping over Manus with an assessment that felt like physical pressure. In that unnerving stare, Manus understood the full, crushing weight of the name Calgar. This was no harbor for children's fantasies. This was a manufactorum of living weapons, warriors tempered in the sacred forges of Terra and eternally reshaped on the battlefield. Your journey commences here, aspirant, Sicarius stated, his voice as inflexible and cold as the volcanic rock that formed the mountains of Macragge. Standard protocol applies. Your lineage dissolves at this gate. Your history becomes an irrelevance. Forward momentum relies solely upon your physical resilience and the unwavering purity of your will to serve the Emperor. Nothing else. Manus inclined his head once, a curt motion, letting the pronouncement sink down into his core. His past was inconsequential, a burden thankfully discarded. Tacitin was interred alongside his friend's corpse in the bloody halls of Thulia Minor. Only Manus Calgar remained, that name a blade waiting to be quenched in the challenges ahead. It would be with that name he would cleave his future. The formidable gates groaned, ancient gears protesting like awakening titans, swinging inward to unveil the Spartan immensity of the inner keep. Sunlight fell ruthlessly onto vast, open training arenas, meticulously laid out and brutal in their simplicity. Manus stepped across the threshold, and the sensory assault was immediate. The blinding flash of cobalt armor reflecting the harsh sun and disciplined rose across parade grounds. The sharp, ringing clang of ceramite striking ceramite. The deeper, rhythmic thud of impact practice weapons meeting densely woven ballistic gel targets designed to mimic xenos hide. The harsh bark of sergeants drilling squads. An ozone tang beneath hanging skeins of dust and sweat and heated machinal vapor. The indefinable, bone-deep thrum of raw energy, disciplined power humming from thousands of minds and bodies dedicated solely to war. Here was the incandescent core, perpetually burning. There was no pause, no respite whispered amongst the marching cadences. Every figure moved with relentless purpose, each maneuver executed as if the final fate of an entire sector rested upon its perfection. For them, in the grand calculus of imperial survival, perhaps it truly did. Manus felt the sheer overwhelming scale constrict his chest, a flicker of dizziness threatening beneath the crushing atmosphere of absolute dedication. Sicarius's voice sliced through the cacophony like a monomolecular blade, flat and absolute. "Observe well, Calgar," he commanded, the words forging themselves on the air. "This is the reductive essence of service. From this point forward, childhood is an excised limb. You are Aspirant Calgar of the Ultramarines chapter. Assessment is constant, based solely on deeds, not declarations. Each warrior within these walls paid a profound price for his place. Should you wish to stand amongst them, the cost demanded will extract every shred of your soul." The weight solidified along Marneus Calgar's shoulders, compressing his spine with expectation from the silent giants surrounding him, expectation carved indelibly into the very stones by 10,000 years of tradition, expectation arising from the silent vow sworn over a cooling body. Doubt was an unauthorized luxury within these precincts. He bore the name Marneus Calgar, the mantle fit with brutal finality. Under Sicarius's unwavering, diamond-hard tutelage, Marneus Calgar endured the relentless metamorphosis required to ascend from aspirant to Astartes, a process designed to fracture ordinary men at every joint. The training regime possessed a withering brutality, calibrating itself to the absolute limits of physical resilience, mental endurance, and psychic-spiritual fortitude. Days collapsed into weeks, weeks blurred into months beneath a battery of repetitive exertion, punishing obstacle courses, sleepless tactical simulations demanding perfect recall under simulated psychic assault, and bone-shattering unarmed combat drills against weapon servitors set lethally beyond safety limits. Marneus navigated this not as a stranger to anguish. The desperate, gore-slicked flight through Thulia miners' brothels and mining tunnels had annealed his primitive capacity to withstand suffering. But here, standing dwarfed beneath the crushing peaks of mountainous Macragge, beneath the unflinching gaze of Captain Sicarius, he encountered the distilled, sacred meaning of Ultramar discipline incarnate. Sicarius possessed no repertoire for compassion. His pedagogy manifested as ceaseless physical provocation and intellectual lashings. Demands verged perpetually on impossible. Yet beneath that unyielding carapace resided a reservoir of ancient insight forged across centuries of bloodshed in the Emperor's name. Insight that Marneus absorbed with the desperate thirst of one starved, knowing each intricate lesson was relentlessly sculpting his spirit and brain towards an inhuman ideal. Discipline renders the shield. Sicarius's voice would cut through the air like a sergeant's whistle during grueling, soul-grinding drills under pitiless skies. Its absence guarantees ultimate failure regardless of brute talent. Strive not merely as a warrior of martial killing might, Calgar. Strive as an enduring instrument in the Emperor's grasp. Your life it ceased to be your personal property the instant your feet touched these stones. It is consigned. It was within the continuous unfolding of these harsh parables that Marneus grasped the intense, binding nature of the sacrament he had undertaken. The name Calgar was no empty honorific conferred casually. This designation signified an unbreakable sacrosanct oath, defining existence itself henceforth. The terrifyingly clear pathway ahead promised agonies beyond Thulia Minor, demanding complete surrender unto terrifying titans like Sicarius. Yet surprisingly, this crushing weight proved less suffocating than the heavy grief he still secreted internally like radiation. Service to the pervasive concept of the Emperor provided structure amidst anarchy, a relentless locus of light defying impending universal entropy. Fellow aspirants observed Marneus with subdued combinations of wary curiosity and constrained respect, complexly layered in the chapter's various initiation cadres. His combat intuition proved devastatingly apparent, brutalized into existence by Thulia Minor's baptism of fire and further, consecrated on Macragge's sacrificial stone altars beneath Sicarius's critical eye. But the force propelling Marneus wasn't merely martial skill. It was his grim will, that bedrock conviction a man denuded of everything intrinsic, yet discovering within that hollowed state the resilience of rendered promethium igniting, years compacted under tireless siege. Marneus ascended meticulously within the chapter's grinding hierarchy. His battleproofing occurred initially along Ultramar's ragged galactic outskirts, brutal mopping actions against desultory heretic bands and emergent orc spores. Testing progressed gradually unto more ambitious crusades, throwing him screaming alongside shield brothers into the gaping maw confronting the tenebrous forces of chaos cyclic mutations. The unrelenting fungal frenzied greenskin tides voracious for destruction, nightmare xenoforms sprouting eyes from darkness specifically to rip apart the flimsy foundations beneath human secular belief. Sicarius remained a shadowing polestar throughout these hardening gauntlets, his firm, guiding pressure persisting as it had amidst training grounds. The relationship, originating as regulation strictures of commander and subordinate recruit, acquired nuances over decades studded with excessive violence, parasitic accretions, quietly resembling tacit mutual esteem. For Sicarius perceived nascent potential magnitude stirring within Manus, an eerily familiar crystalline focus, much like his own younger self, while Marneus Calgar, inevitable through countless engagements, demonstrated worthiness unto scrutiny through relentless acts affirming his devotion unto duty and survival. Yet every victory coalesced painstakingly through faith, but equally the harmonic resonance originating within Tacitin's initial anguished vow beside Marneus Calgar's defiled corpse. Each sword's deadly edge stroke, each tactical command snapped mid-battle shot creating imperial successes were silent sequential obeisances paid to memory. As the exhausting preparatory decades neared some form of constructive conclusion, demarcating transition from aspirant illuminate unto consecrated battle brother bearing the eagle-clad ultramarine trim uniformly across his gen-enhanced physique, Marneus Calgar returned towards the dark prow of the fortress monastery's primary ingress. This time, however, awaiting recognition was no wavering boy-apprentice antsy before destiny's oppressive nearness. This was an undeniably weaponized form engineered expressly by sorrow, renewed purpose stitched seamlessly beneath weeping scar tissue patterns and reinforced bone. He had ascended beyond Tacitin's meager serfdom specter beneath House Calgar insignia. Marneus Calgar arose as manifest entity, demigod bioengineered solely towards perpetuating imperial will, maintaining sacred oaths across millennia. His was a name intended not merely as recollection over tomb effigies nodding in museum silence, but a blaze traversing the galaxy's future, only through constant deeds, recorded permanently atop the charred bones burning the bellicose skies above hostile worlds. Having sworn upon something fundamental shared between Tacitin and the fallen boy at dawn's first gray edge, an oath now fused permanently within him, like braided adamantium cabling, embedded in his very musculature, forming the unyielding architecture upon which his monstrous potential as Marneus Calgar was constructed. That oath's insatiable fire radiating from him, over untamed vacuum, would ultimately define every remaining moment regardless scale. The heavens wept near Sheridan, a distressing arterial crimson viscously streaked beneath the vast boiling smoke monsters birthed from war's volcanic crucible above the planet. 1,000 vessels carved luminous agony across the stratosphere, their lances tearing weeping runic wounds across the bruised orbital sphere. In appearance silent from space, Sheridan resembled a Pteridova infection, actively expanding upward towards untamed malignancy, its surface cracked open like old burn scabs peeled back revealing layers beneath corrupted absolutely underneath by the starving god of decay's implacable violence. The acrid stench of war hung thick in the recirculated air of the Valen's Revenge's command deck, a metallic tang mixed with ozone and burnt ceramite, every inhalation tasting like defeat alongside the promise of destruction. Weeks bled into weeks here on Sheridan Prime, each sunrise illuminating fresh horrors as the Ultramarines, Chapter Master Pythol at their head like a battered, unyielding statue, fought to purge the crude, fungal infestation of orcs choking the system. Victories were wrestled from the blood-soaked mud of trench lines, their celebrations brief and muted by the mounting butcher's bill in Geneforged lives. Marneus Calgar, his face a grim mask solid as graven stone beneath the harsh luminescence, surveyed the tactical hologlobe depicting the planet below. He was a veteran now, scars mapping campaigns across a dozen worlds onto his soul as much as his plate. He detasted the sweet nectar of triumph and the bitter gall of defeat, forging his deeds into legends within the Ultramarines' chronicles. He knew war, yet Sheridan gnawed at him, an unsettling presence worming its way past indoctrinated focus deeper than the ever-present roar of distant artillery shaking the deck plates, more insidious than the acrid fog veiling the dying continent below. It slithered in the forced calm of his brother officers, the way their clipped Vox reports would cease abruptly, leaving a silence too loud, filled only by the engine's heartbeat, their eyes flickering towards the command throne for a reassurance that wasn't fully there. This shadow beyond the savage, mindless brutality of the orcs, this something lurking at the edge of perception Calgar, though his chapter might still call him young, felt it like a chill vibration through his bones, a predator's breath on his nape. His long-hunned instincts screamed along dulled nerves. Beside him stood Pythol, the cornerstone upon whom their resistance had been built. The chapter master's Terminator plate, ancient and valorous, was a grim mosaic where repairs fought a losing battle against atomizing scars and crater-deep gouges from hundreds of battlefields, the blue barely visible beneath the patina of relentless war. He'd been their unmoving rock throughout the hell of Sheridan, his resolve an adamantium column even as the orc tides swelled and crashed with increasing fury. Now though, standing before the final tactical tableau promising ultimate victory, a great green blight massing for one colossal, decisive push against Imperial lines, a deeper fatigue etched itself into the grim lines around Pythal's eyes, a weariness that bore the gravity of eons, heavier than mere physical exhaustion. His voice, when it cut the tense silence, resonated with command yet carried an almost undetectable rasp, like stone grinding against stone. "Calgar," he stated, gaze fixed not on the younger Astartes but on the swirling red icons below. "What do you see down there?" Calgar shifted his focus to the holosphere. The familiar nightmare unfolded within, waves of bestial orcs gathering like a tide, their primitive, smoke-belching war machines stompas and battle wagons, crude parodies of Imperial might rumbling ever closer across blasted landscapes. Routine savagery, yet the pattern jabbed like a dagger point. Orcs were mindless anarchy embodied, their attacks a tsunami of chaotic violence. Here they converged, focused, unified under a dreadful, invisible lash. "Something drives them, my lord," Calgar answered, his own voice steady as fortress granite. "This coordination, it is alien to their nature." "Wrong," a slow, ponderous nod from Pythal. His gauntlet tightened almost imperceptibly on the blessed power sword pommel slung at his hip, white-knuckled even through ceramite. "Aye," the word was a low rasp, a grim concession shrouded in storms of implication. "Something drives them, but the cost of inaction is annihilation. We cannot wait for answers from this darkness. We push, we break them. Now." Calgar's nod of agreement was automatic, drilled by decades of discipline, yet his heart felt leaden, a terrible cold counterpoint to the furnace roar of impending battle. Victory shimmered so tantalizingly close, yet it felt fragile as spun glass over an abyss, a candle flame guttering against the crushing gale they were about to unleash. Pythals will shape the plan. The Ultramarines, spearheaded by the chapter master himself, would spearhead the final assault on the Orc stronghold, a jagged monstrosity of lashed scrap metal and murdered stone scarring the planet's skin. Pythal would lead from the absolute front, as immutable as the dictates of the Codex Astartes. It was his way. His very presence ignited the fire in his warriors' souls, forged them into an unstoppable blade. It was a creed paid in blood and chiseled into unforgiving metal by pure courage, a doctrine that had never faltered until this accursed Shayad hour. The planet's surface swallowed them in fire and thunder. The Orcs surged forward in roaring, green tides thicker and faster than any wave Calgar had witnessed against their lines. Their guttural bellows formed a near-physical wall of sound that hammered against Astartes' audio dampeners. Bolters spat their hard, percussive fury, chewing through hulking green forms, filling the boiling air with gore and the ozone crackle of lascannons. Chainswords snarled, carving arcs of sizzling meat and spinning teeth. Calgar fought shoulder-to-shoulder with his brothers, a thunderclap in human form, his precision deadly, his actions economical lethality incarnate. Yet the Orc press was suffocating, laden with unnatural malice, a hydraulic press squeezing from all sides. For every torturous meter gained towards the fortress wreathed in smoke and crude bellowing icons, they yielded ground against impossible grinding pressure. At the violent epicenter burned Pythal. He fought as a legend rendered into terrible motion, a whirlwind encased in scarred blue and gold. His power sword was a bolt of judgment cleaving through Orc flesh and crude armor with brutal efficiency, arcs of gore tracing its path. His movements possessed a terrifying, preternatural grace born of centuries of perfecting the art of absolute death. Yet even mountains erode. The end came not with challenge or heroic last stand, but sudden, irrevocable annihilation. A titanic Orc stampa, a walking cathedral of scrap weaponry, lumbered through its own ranks like a deranged god. Its main cannon, hideously grafted and cylindrical, roared. A searing column of plasma lightning, hotter than a star's heart, erupted across the charred earth, enveloping the ultramarine van where Pythal stood. Time did not slow, it petrified. Calgar's world fractured. The impossible flash blinding white against the smoke-stained gloom, the shockwave uttering itself as a physical blow against his armor, the grotesque ballet of shattered, armored forms, brothers torn apart like dolls tossed into a furnace chimney. And then through the blinding afterimage and billowing smoke, the cracked crater. At its heart lay Salvation's ruin, Pythal. His indomitable form lay utterly still, shattered. His magnificent armor, pride of Macragge, was a soot-blacked, fractured ruin, rent and vaporized across the chestplate. Silence detonated within Calgar's mind, obliterating the crashing cacophony of battle. Gunfire, screams, explosions, all silence beneath a tidal wave of cold, numbing horror whose magnitude threatened to shatter his very bone structure. He stood paralyzed, unable to breathe the furnace air, unable to tear his gaze from the desecration of absolute leadership lying amid the crater's shards. The battlefield seemed to dissolve into a silent nightmare vignette, disconnected, unreal. Then the brutal sucking of air back into tortured lungs, the hammer blow return of reality. each sound amplified to an agonizing shriek. The orcs roared with renewed ferocity, sensing the rip in the Imperial soul. Shock curdled instantly into a crushing, overwhelming mass, pressing Calgar to the filthy ground. Command, the mantle of ultimum, condensed into a single frozen microsecond. Pythal's tutelage, the battlefield wisdom gleaned over years shared, the sacred duty of command he'd only ever witnessed executed flawlessly, now dropped like a mountain peak onto his shoulders. Grief howled within him, primal and immense, but the enemy granted no vigil. The rampaging greenskins refused mourning rites. Heartbeats hammered Drukhari, poisoned through his veins. Adrenaline screamed in every synapse. Duty, hardwired and undeniable, crushed doubt and sorrow beneath its ponderous weight. With an inhalation that felt like swallowing shards of the void, Calgar moved. His voice, honed by command protocols but resonant with a terror-stiffened bass note forged in that instant, ripped across the slaughter. Brothers, to me, the command lashed across the stunned battlefield. Ultramarines staggered, smoke streaming from mangled armor, momentarily leaderless amidst the shockwave's carnage. Discipline like tempered steel snapped taut. They rallied, coalescing around this suddenly granted access point amidst the ongoing apocalypse, hope flaring as their defense collapsed. "We fight on, for the Emperor, for Pythal," Calgar roared, the words rising above the choking fumes, choked with grief yet burning with a terrifying conviction birthed wholly from necessity. Fight on they did. The conflict descended into sheer attritional nightmare. Hours stretched into a timeless eternity within the smoke-choked valley, the orcs hurling themselves at the ultramarine shield wall with mindless, unholy frenzy, pressing them ever backward, grinding down numbers with horrific efficiency. Calgar led now, his soul encased in sacred ice, his every tactical command lancing out with unnerving clarity born of innate genius honed by the Holocaust that spawned it. Where the greenskin pressure threatened to buckle and burst the Imperial lines, Calgar was elemental presence. His storm bolter roared its vengeance, explosions cleaving paths through the green horde. His leadership wasn't merely tactical, it was an aura of indomitable purpose, a beacon cutting through despair, reigniting the fire of defiance in his brothers' hearts through sheer, unrelenting force of will. In that crucible of annihilation, burdened by cosmic grief yet refusing to bow, Marneus Calgar stood inviolable. The mantle of leadership, heavy beyond comprehension, settled as a state of being. When the grotesque roar of the last charging orc gargant ceased its horrific bellow, silenced by concentrated doomfare missiles collapsing its ramshackle combustive heart, a near physical hush smothered the battlefield. Only the crackle of burning promesium, the settling groan of colossal wreckage, and the wounded sigh of the scorched wind remained, punctuated by the muffled, augmetic breaths of survivors. Calgar stood atop the jagged, steaming rubble that had been the orc fortification's apex. Around him stretched a charnel field testament in broken ceramite and pulverized flesh azurite, an iron mixed indiscriminately with foul green and black ichor under thick carpeting smog. Victory. Purchased with the Imperium's rarest currency, the lifeblood flooded from Macragge's veins onto a hateful rock. Smoke, thick enough to choke a god, grudgingly parted before industrial-strength chemscrubbers operating somewhere distant, finally revealing the storm-tossed heavens. Under that hellish light, amidst the ruin of the orc menace and the ruin of his chapter's spirit, Calgar looked upward. Pythal paid the final coin for this tarnished prize. And now the anchor weight of the chapter mastery, sacred and terrifying, anchored itself irrevocably onto Marneus Calgar. Not sought, not prophesied quite so abruptly. Yet as he drew his gaze downward, sweeping across the surviving brothers assembling at the base of the mound, their cracked, grime-caked faces turned towards him not with confusion, but with the profound, desperate expectation of guidance, of strength he knew no other path existed. Fate demanded endurance. Within him, in the echoing cavernous hollow carved by Pythal's absence, a certainty coalesced colder and heavier than his armor. Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines. With that grim clarity came the suffocating talons of consequence, the chapter's punishing trials, the Imperium's desperate future, clenched tight within his newly empowered grasp. The churning seas surrounding Talisar IV displayed nature's primal wrath incarnate. Obsidian waves, mountains capped with frostwhite spume, slammed against shell-shocked cliffs with the fury of demon artillery, each impact echoing the planet's agony. The sky overhead loomed the color of necrotic flesh, stained with bruisepurple storm banks pregnant with grinding lightning vistas. Yet looming above the natural fury towering over the cliff-edge strong points was a dread exponentially more profound. The crushing shadow descending beyond the veils of tempest endured on orbiting icons scanned with real-time predictive arrays. It had arrived from the void on vast engines driven by savage purpose. What had begun as vicious coastal raiding, by opportunistic orc warships, plunging meteor-like through the weak orbital cordons, had metastasized into planetary invasion within solar rotations. Cities, once bastions gleaming ultramarine order, were now broken carcasses, vomiting columns of toxic smog twisting skyward like terminal pillars, their grand avenues choked by the mangled dead and the relentless tread of booted xenos' feet. The defenders, honor-bound lords and Imperial Guard remnants fused into one desperate shield, were bloodied ghosts against the unnerving green storm rampaging across the continent. Hope here was whispered prayer against absolute comprehension of annihilation. Marneus Calgar absorbed the precipice below, the brine-laced hurricane clawing at his warplate, tasting ozone and defiled ash. The mantle rested upon him like a leaden shroud, thicker now, since Pythal's pyre upon Sheoden had consecrated Calgar not merely as battlemaster, but as inevitable successor. He had led, as he must, flanking maneuvers on Quiseth, holding actions within the skeletal hives of Braxis, sept each engagement a testing crucible searing away hesitation but crystallizing ambiguity. His brothers watched, always watching, silent adjutants to destiny awaiting confirmation upon swordpoint demonstration. The Ultramarines assembled before him on the clifftop deployment landing zone represented earthbound thunderheads suppressed into geometrical order. Their cobalt warplate formed unshakable ranks, grim iconic silhouettes against the raging celestial partition behind them, the tempest lashing futilely at parade-ground stillness. Offshore against the artillery horizon, beneath billowing toxic smoke canopy distorted by gravity storms, moved the Orc assault force. Their gargantuan battle forts discharged fury, and the underslung silhouettes of gargantuan walkers, massed like obese mercury-feeding tubes, stompa mobs gathering momentum coordinate mass emerging amphibians, crawling out of an ocean gone permanently insane. Calgar permitted himself 3 nanoseconds of appreciation for their devastating numbers, their unsubtle, gore-drenched approach ideally fit for strategic dissection. Reports consumed and terrain datalogs processed merged into complete tactical comprehension within his mind. The Codex Astartes inscribed paths upon paths, roots carved luminous by the mind and legacy, bequeathed the chapter from momentous historic precedent. But Calgar understood its living heartbeat, pulsing with situational intellect forged by Guilliman himself, not for ironclad dogma, but as framework upon which adaptable genius must erect victory. Rigidity in the whirlwind was dissolution compounded. Apply operational diagnosis. The greenskin pathologically thrived exclusively on crushing impacts fueled by scale brute action, meeting their culminating wave headlong invited catalytic extermination tortuously prolonged. To endure positionally invited oppressive attrition, precision was required, precision unseen within this vile xenos genome. Turning his gaze from the impending horrorscape towards the captains assembled, alongside him warriors joined in innumerable purgatorial campaigns, whose implicit trust forged an armor around his will. Calgar identified Captain Sicarius closest, a blade poised eternally on instinct's hair trigger, exuding anticipatory fire. Even Sicarius, embodiment of warrior conviction confined strictly within armor casing, seized seriousness. We relinquish positional defense, Calgar voxed, clear across every encrypted band upon the precipice plateau. Surprise and dismantlement become our spear blade. We seize control fragmentation formation, concurrently denying coherence impact. Calculated maneuver scheme collated preceding statement, orchestrated by nuanced and deliberate enhancement modulation, resolving exploitation weakness, tactical exteriorization, ordnance projection, greater intensity suppression, enfilading completion, advanced section, arrayed maximum battery cyclic discharge, localized saturation, impenetrable lines, collapse, recovery, impossible maneuver, commence, coordinated ambush, intercept, obliterate, upon open defense sector fragmentation now. Woven strategic brilliance, adapting Guilliman's blueprints into surgical mastery, designed for maximum dissociative termination. Calgar saw Talisar not only Harasundant conquest target, but crucible where he annexes command reality, pivoted on defeating tactical zenith of his capability designation, warranted permanent leadership establishment absolutes. It must prevail authentic warfare, array designated flawless. Execute mandate decisive confirmation viability core command structure, bequeathed upon him, encoded inevitably wait valor resolve victoria, confirmed extended implications, beyond sector survival. Focus absolute calibrated for exterminate the scourge threatening Talisar, secured chapter heritage simultaneously. Ready move interior permanent alignment activate vector resolution supreme command function, enacted perpetual implement contingency execution, ingress approach initiation zero tolerance. The voice that cut through the tension in the command bunker remained rock steady, though anxious Calgar felt the colossal weight of command settle heavier upon his shoulders with each syllable. We take the fight to them. It wasn't an invitation for debate or a plea for opinion. It was a statement of celestial law, forged in the crucible of his will, leaving no room for question or hesitation. The assembled captains, seasoned veterans all, met the declaration not with surprise, but with absolute, unshakable conviction, their nods grim tributes to battles past and leadership proven. They had witnessed firsthand the cold, lightning-flash brilliance of Calgar's mind, his uncanny ability to outthink enemies who believed themselves cunning, anticipating their blunders steps before they even formed the thought. This assault, they knew deep in their enhanced genocide, would be the sharpest crucible of his command yet, a trial by firestorm. Yet doubt was an alien concept here. Their faith was an iron certainty that he would lead them through the winnowing flames. "Prepare the Thunderhawks," Calgar commanded, the order crisp and final, his conscious mind already knotting the strands of the unfolding carnage, step by calculated step, enemy reaction counterbalanced by space marine resolve. "We strike at their congested heart, shatter their spine, and the entire horde will dissolve into the chaos it barely holds back." The plan possessed a brutal, diamond-hard simplicity, fitting for transcendent strategy. The orcs, swollen with numbers and hubris, had coalesced into a vast, bellowing mass, poised like a fanged hammer blow against the Ultramarines' final fortifications. Yet their grotesque command structure, a fragile pyramid of flensed skulls and brute intimidation, was concentrated blindingly in one vulnerable apex. The warboss's stinking, ramshackle camp huddled like carrion under the shadow of a vast, unforgiving mountain ridge thrusting towards the bruised heavens. It was there, amidst the guttural roars and cookfires fueled by wreckage, that the green-skinned leadership clustered, squabbling and posturing. And it was there, into the rotting core of the beast, that Calgar's dagger strike would plunge. The Thunderhawks tore shrieking paths through the storm-racked sky, their roaring engines shredding the howling gale into impotent shreds as they arrowed towards the enemy's pulsing, diseased core. Within their steel bellies, crammed among the stoic warriors, Calgar stood immovable, a statue tall amidst roiling seas of ceramite. The immense, suffocating responsibility for the very future of his chapter pressed down, a physical ache deep within his superhuman bones, yet his face showed only immaculate composure, the crushing burden borne with a silence as profound as a tomb. As the lumbering shapes of the orc encampment swelled monstrous in the viewing ports, already belching startled smoke and tracer fire, the Thunderhawks screamed earthwards like falling comets, their chin-mounted assault cannons unleashing rivers of hypervelocity death, strafing the surprised greenskin positions below in brilliant, overlapping lattices of obliteration. Orcs caught half-slumbering or mid-brawl lurched into chaotic motion, a churning green tide scrambling to grasp weapons and mount some semblance of defense under the apocalyptic hailstorm. But precious seconds were already dust whipped away in the downdraft. Calgar and the ebon spearhead of his strike force hit the churned, mud-slick ground hard, boots impacting with heavy, resonant thuds that immediately exploded into motion. They charged forward, chain blades roaring to life, bolters seeking first targets, into the stunned, reeling heart of the foe. The battle was a masterpiece of controlled, lethal violence, furious, fast, and utterly decisive. The orcs, savage and strong but slaves to rage and instinct, hurled themselves forward in untrammeled bloodlust, only to be shattered on the adamantium anvil of ultramarine precision, their crude ferocity no match for the cold, orchestrated discipline and overwhelming firepower of the Emperor's finest. Calgar himself became the eye of the storm made flesh, a whirlwind of righteous annihilation. His power fist, the fist of vengeance itself, detonated through crude orc armor and yielding bone with apocalyptic force, spraying gore like obscene confetti across the mud. He fought not just with the engineered power surging in his limbs, but with the incisive, calculating intellect of a grand strategist, every parry and sidestep predicted, every blow delivered with perfect economy towards the ruin of the foe. He was the incarnate core, the blazing beacon of resolve around which his brothers rallied, a manifestation of man's fragile order imposing its structure upon the screaming chaos of the xenos. And then came the centerpiece, the grunting monstrosity at the diseased heart of it all. The warboss, a swollen mountain of scarred green muscle and crude iron plating, easily twice the size of its kin, spotted the armored giant devastating its elite and charged with an earth-shaking bellow that shook teeth loose kilometers away, its axe a fell slab of jagged metal hauled high for a killing stroke. Calgar turned, planted his feet in the sucking mire, and met the primeval assault head-on without flinching, meeting raw animal fury with precise, annihilating power. The power fist whistled through the rain-lashed air and impacted the warboss's barrel chest with the thunderpeal sound of collapsing worlds. Ribs exploded inward in a shower of shrapnel-like fragments, the colossal xenos form folding like rotten cloth amidst cascades of thick, brackish blood and the rending screech of broken armor plates, crashing to the mud as nothing more than a twitching meat mountain. Its death rattle was barely heard over the cacophony. With the central animating brute intelligence extinguished, the fragile cohesion binding the orc horde evaporated instantaneously. The seemingly unstoppable brackish tide fractured like rotten ice. Momentum died. Terror took its ghastly route. Their leaders fell shrieking to blue steel blades with assembly-line precision, the momentum vanishing into panicked flight. Greenskins turned on each other, trampled the wounded in their eagerness to flee the azure-armored nightmare. Their shrill bellows of triumph mutated to terror within brutal minutes. When the acrid smoke finally began to thin, drifting like exhausted wraiths over the churned, bleeding earth, Marneus Calgar stood amidst the vast graveyard of the fallen, his once-pristine armor anointed thickly in the glutinous, alien lifeblood of the foe, the rhythmic steam vent hiss of his respiration, the only sound audible over the fading booms, the very air marking the exertion of the apocalypse he had wrought. Around him, the dead lay grotesque and multitudinous, heaps of cooling green flesh, pathetic bundles of broken teeth and shattered axes strewn in testament to Asart's might, their crude idols shattered alongside their lives. Victory was absolute, as deep as it was wide. Later, as the ragged survivors of Talisar, shell-shocked civilians blinking like mole rats beneath a violence they'd prayed never to see, crept from ruined shelters to stare in disbelief at the ravaged field echoing with only the buzzing of corpseflies, the name of Marneus Calgar was whispered from parched lips, no longer merely a fortress commander, but a sigil of deliverance, spoken with hushed reverence. His decisive stroke hadn't merely saved their paltry world. It had etched into the hollow archives and the soul of the chapter itself that he was worthy, irrevocably, of the title they all knew destiny now demanded. Later still, beneath the adamantium vaults of Macragge, within grand halls echoing with 10 millennia of solemnity, the formal ceremony played out like sacred theater. Calgar knelt before the assembled, barrack-rimmered command structure of the chapter, the newly decrypted scroll held before him, his head bowed respectfully low beneath the proud snap of Ultramarines banners, century-old triumphs depicted on unfurling tapestries that dominated the soaring stonework. The bioliths cast long, dancing shadows. The full honor guard, resplendent in intricate gold-chased ceremonial warplate, burnished to radiant perfection, encircled him in silent, watchful witness, their archaic weapons gleaming like captured stars in the flickering, solemn reverence of the Nishi-mounted torches. Dominating the vista at the chamber's far end stood the revered relics of Robout Guilliman, the Primarch, the Avenging Sun, his bronze statue seeming to regard the proceedings with cold approval, his vast presence infusing the very air, his monumental legacy carved into the obsidian floor and whispered within the very stones. And before this conclave of ancient lineage and steadfast past, witnessed by brothers whose faces were histories of campaigns fought, Marneus Calgar was formally invested, with a title role of sacred biologic incantation and the pressing of the ancient chapter signet into his hand, as Lord Defender, as Custodian, as Chapter Master of the Ultramarines. The final threads of command settling onto his shoulders, the weight coiling tight around his very genostructure. He rose slowly, deliberately, the ceramite joints hissing softly, and the crushing enormity of the moment descended upon him like a sick-inducted shroud, woven by the ghosts of a million lost brethren. He was no longer simply a warrior king on the blood-soaked stage, no longer merely the commander of a spear tip in the void. He was the chapter, its living soul and blood-pulsing core, the ultimate guardian of Guilliman's imperishable blueprint embodied, the sworn shield of Ultramar itself, every agri-world to every fortress moon. And with this impossible honor came the heaviest responsibility, the pledge poured into his very marrow, to uphold the heretical challenge of the Codex Astartes. The Codex, penned by Guilliman himself in blood ink on parchment rendered from deeds yet unfought, was not simply a holy text to the Ultramarines, but the blazing primary guiding their path through interstellar annihilation. To Calgar's razor intellect, it pulsed not as a dry recitation of prohibitions, but as a shockingly vital testament to the Primarch's unmatched vision for a realm of reason amidst the screaming dark. Under Calgar's mandate, the Ultramarines wouldn't merely offer dutiful lip service to the Codex. They would become its obsidian incarnation. Yet this truth resided within him. The Codex, for all its divinity, was no infallible prophecy penned at the universe's dawn. Guilliman forged it entirely as a guiding star complex, glittering overhead, not heavy chains binding movement to mud, a framework to elevate tactical thought, not strangle it. To embody true leadership required the excruciating clarity to see when rigid adherence saved worlds, and when necessity demanded the creation of a new doctrine, forged raw within the screaming fortifiers of battle itself. This lesson Calgar had conquered at Bloody Talisar adaptation, preserved where blind dogma murdered, and this pragmatic understanding would sculpt every command decision in the engulfing darkness yet to come. Under his hand, vigilant and adaptive, the Ultramarines would endure as the immaculate exemplar of the Astartes ideal, the absolute standard against which all other chapters measured their own flawed heroism. Marneus Calgar, resplendent now in the fully girded mantle of Chapter Master, would see Robot Guilliman's imperishable legacy endure through the next 10 millennia and beyond. The skies above Macragge had always transfixed those born beneath their pristine vaults, seemingly eternal stretches of profound, oceanic blue arching flawlessly over the dazzling marble citacrowns and formidable citadels standing proudly as Ultramar's very bones. Yet now those familiar heavens seemed to fracture under a spreading contagion, each twilight drawn longer, heavier, more claustrophobic. The once-peaceful air thrummed incessantly now, vibrating with the monstrous orchestration of preparation, the scream of Valhallan patterned forges running molten steel day and night, the thunderous stamp of assembly yards birthing land raiders, the screech of landing craft disgorging reserves drawn from every corner of the 500 worlds. Like slow-acting poison, the realization spread. For the first time in its glittering history, the unassailable jewel of Ultramar faced an encroaching shadow that not even the wisest, the most grandly prophesied seers, could have predicted in their most fevered midnight workings. The Tyranids, that name like bile on tactical cogitator feeds, had begun their silent devourment. It manifested as disjointed vox-crackle, fragments of screams captured and relayed by fleeing merchantmen, reports from dithered astropathic relays dying one by one into dreadful silence, whispers morphing into desperate confirmations. Stories of entire waypoint stations vanishing within obscene, devouring hourglasses of time, of worlds stripped faster than a termagant infestation could be catalogued. Planets reduced to sterile, scarred mineral balls with terrifying efficiency, all organic life sucked dry into a galactic digestion so vast, so alien in its insatiability, it bordered on blasphemy against reality itself. Initially, it seemed phantasmal, a monstrous myth brewed by star-meted navigators trapped too long in the looming psychic shadow of the maelstrom. Yet as the fragmented distress signals piled higher than orbital junk, each transmission painting a canvas more chilling, the frozen tendril of inescapable truth finally coiled around Ultramar's heart. Something utterly predatory, fundamentally other, was ravening across the galactic fringe, wielding silence like a weapon, and its voracious tendrils were reaching, pulse by galactic pulse, towards the heartlight of Ultramar. By the moment the vast, mind-piercing totality of the Tyranid threat emerged from desperate augur interpretations and pleas for reinforcement, arriving like echo ghosts through the warp, its vanguard was already scouring worlds at the Empire's outer rim. Hive Fleet Behemoth, Imperial designation tagged after its scale, defied available hypermetric descriptions, advanced with the inexorability of a supernova shockwave, a writhing nightmare constellation of bioships blotting out entire stellar nurseries, eclipsing suns in their sheer horrific, brute mass as it descended, locust-like, upon the defenseless frontier worlds of the Imperium of Man. The Tyranids perverted the concept of warfare beyond baseline comprehension. An omni-consuming hive swarm that acknowledged neither individual fear nor collective mercy, driven by a hunger as fundamental and bottomless as collapsing singularities. Their sole purpose was the annihilation of all organic life reduction unto oblivion, planets left as barren tombstones spinning silently through dead systems. And as desperate, increasingly garbled astropathic shrieks filtered through the static reports from Kar Juniash, Prandium, Ispandur, grim indicators of worlds flaring bright, and then snuffing out like guttering candles, the burden of orchestrating the defense fell entirely upon Marneus Calgar. He had faced the fanged multitudes across countless battlefields across his ascendant centuries, orcs in their mindless billions, chaos traders wielding blasphemies spat from mad hellforges, xenos mysteries defying classification. None resembled this. There was no parloprobe extending chitin arms, no genetic offer of negotiated coexistence or warning, merely an ocean of clicking, acidic mandibles closing with terrifying speed. They weren't an enemy, they were a living apocalypse, an obscenely animated extinction event given form as chitin and ripper swarm, a tidal annihilation of biomass sweeping prosperity before it into cosmic dust. It represented psychic annihilation incarnate. And for the first time in his millennia-long vigil, standing alone atop the stratagem silo under Macragge's dimming sky, observing the projection globes flickering with worlds sputtering into grim darkness, a shard of pure, unshielded dread pierced Calgar's perfected mental discipline. A fierce, blasphemous whisper wondering if Ultramar itself could hold against this unspeakable appetite, this voiceless, implacable destiny measured in digesting worlds. Doubt was the precursor of failure. Duty chiseled his own intricate biology harder and more unyielding than ceramic. His oath-sworn duty was primal, carved into his core self. He existed for Ultramar, and he would see it endure, scorch the rock of reality itself, shouldering the cost. Immediately, the silent martial pulse went out from the fortress of Hera. Gather. All deployed companies recoiled to hegemon-bearing ships, chapters passed unto the fold summoned under law of association protocols. Every veteran squad scarred by Ghoul Star's nightmares, every land raider in reserve, every latent strategic asset, every nugget of restricted archaeotech from vaults deep beneath the rock fang of Illyrium. Worlds hardened, agriprocessor silo farms became bastions, orbital defense lasers bloomed like deadly metal flowers on Fortress World moons, every corridor on every starport city honeycombed with macro-pattern laws emplacement. The Stratsenoirs under Calgar's command, the finest engineers and logisticians disciples of Guilliman's own forbidding logic, labored endlessly. The decree flashed across all wavelengths and noospheric channels. Not 1 inch of Ultramar dust would be seeded without rendering it uninhabitable gore paste under vast bootprints of the encroaching xenos hellswarm. Yet the staggering totality of the menace remained maddeningly elusive. How inoculate worlds against a vacuum devourer? How scaffold tactics against an adversary, whose reaction benchmark was consumption, renders conventional loss meaningless? How could Talisar-stained swords ever staunch this endless astronomical bleeding? Calgar's considerable mental prowess obsessively refined its focus, crystalline sharp, upon Macragge. It was the alpha point of Ultramarine. The cityplanes around the Hera fortress pulsed as Imperial Bastionbreaker code translated into reality spanning continents. If Behemoth's worldjaws should close around Macragge, they'd encounter not merely gates, but a celestial wrecking sphere constructed specifically for the oceanic swarm, its adamantium battlements manned by humanity's sharpest spear, fighting upon ground consecrated by the architect himself. When Hive Fleet Behemoth finally emerged from the warp tendril, darkening the Macragge optical systems, it was as if the gurgling, churning gut of the galaxy itself sicked up its primal predators onto the pristine marble plains. No clean warships invading tight-spaced formations, instead vast alien atrocities barked obscenely off-edged measurement. Kilometers-long bioships like igneous sea slugs, dripping bioacid and clutching frozen atmosphere, twisting, void-swimming fungal colonies, bristling with symbiotic weapon larvae scarring isolated convoys like callous scars against the void shell of Ultramarine. A nebula alive with parasitic movement, blotting out sacred stars once used as navigation fixes. Atmospheric light levels dwindled into perpetual crepuscular gloom under their shadowed descent. The air vibrated with localized seismic symphonies, planetary defense siren wails sounding flat under the huge, throbbing psychic bass note of countless alien minds screaming one monosyllabic desire: food. Ground shakes echoed the falling of macro-artillery shells calibrated for legion breaking, the first impossible impacts announcing the obdurate refusal of Ultramarine to simply be eaten. Marneus Calgar stood in a shielded revelation chamber deep within the fortress of Hera, his armored form utterly still amidst a hurricane-frenzied command center. Radiation-thick air choked with ozone frying from overloaded cogitators, the echoing cadence of troop requisition Alpha Legionnaire 3rd Quadrant Supplement relief another fortress signal silenced. Beneath the blinding kinetic ferocity of dataflux chaos, Calgar's focus remained absolute, his gaze alien hunter frozen upon the hololithic display. Planetary system coughing crimson real-time updates as continent segments winked infection-pulsing amethyst, flickered palatine, with fortress locations, reporting heavy similarly brightening satellite collisions, blossoming over strategic nodes. Every conceivable move those nightmarish genomic weapon pods ejected possible mutations had been wargamed endlessly until neural pathways burned with the simulations. Now those calculations met hungry claw and acid venomous discharge. It was time to judge cold adaptation against infinite hunger. The battle-consuming Macragge defied any Lutrilla model validations. Tyranids arrived not merely as committed marine assaults, but globally, a tsunami pulse effect breaking simultaneously across defensive nodes in uncountable billions. Beasts burst forth in stolen genes, stolen forms. Hormigaunt-tide flanks broken storm seas, pounding rockcrete retrenchments roaring futilely between. Fleshborer beetles clouding almost mist-thick in flattened forest sectors. Towering Carnifex monsters shrugging direct lemon rust antibunker shells, like hulking simple shrugs off hardened bioplasma, coalescing for retaliatory bursts, melting battlements like armored sugar icing. Each Xenos contender severed into rancid slurry by orbital bolt rounds produced a Stormfront deep replacement wave, slamming against Prometheum underbarrage positions, already burying frontline trenches under gory, decaying mountain flows. But Alara's field, however, remained unbowed, uncompromised territories mapped seamlessly, Guilliman's resolve echoing in artillery spinal cluster responses, pulverizing swarm vortex loci. Calgar's positioning was transtemporal brilliance, refined optimally under frozen computational strain by Stratego's pattern sentinels of old Ultramarine. Planetary battlefields converted organically to infernal grinding points, exploiting technological hold ground via proplotting sniper traps, precision vortex high barrels, causing percussive near-collapse landmass upheaval. Alternating predestined flip-flop points pitfall point zones, denying bioforms footing through clever Perdug subterfuge, creating territorial dominance matrix flowchoke points under refugee avenue focus convoy ship, uplifting instant artillery eradication, torments waiting psychic triggers. At the brutal pole sentinels where howling Arctic screamed straight off poleward precipices, and vast asteroid mountain peaks pierced sunless skies, the immovable met the boundless hunger. There, where titanium-intense psychic clamor shredded lesser minds as the hive mind sought symbolic spinal plexus destruction, Calgar deployed the first company. Not ordinary line marines, these were the Ultramarines reflecting ancient Greek-clone glory, armored in iconic deep navy tactical dreadnought armor glowing angular protection, inert in scheming regions, clustered around immense glaciers, where fortresses housed strategic deep battle Corere Sensoria nodes, keeping planetary defense grids networked under constant, affable pressure. They were a living bastion wall, immovable purpose manifest. Tharsis tactical dreads booms immobilized continental shelves into potent shockwaves by sheer organized weight. Calgar crisply comprehended bioscanners' computations tied directly into hive mind, projected cascades preservation amidst the endless storm had revealed horrific patterns. The Psychoenity's swarm-controlling behemoth possessed intelligence as implacable as cold physics, evolutionary remedy incapable of negotiation measure, always genetically intent upon efficient decapitation, strikes sever neural command eyes rendering body reactions genosuit. Calgar readied calculated, inevitably cementing his resolve that hive behemoth would inevitably swamp polar strategic matrices especially, destroying communication staves rendering coordination futile before pincushioning food diffusion vectors across the surface body. Therefore the sacrifice crystallized unbeatable justification. The first must endure siege attrition providing ultimate mission shield wall, buying irreplaceable window frame minutes forcing Hyssop command, relays elsewhere on world-time defended Shield of Run zone to consolidate before vast Tyranid priority targets, hammered down revealing breathtaking trap counter-offenders prepared. This constituted necessary. Calgar processed bitter mineral grief formulations as waste feasibility calculations over warrior treasures millennia breeding standards men, themselves distillates of Gilliman's logic flesh-etching dynamic perfection. They were incomparable elite, distilled definitively the chapter's genic peak achievers. Agglomerated 40s Millennium endemic defensive folds fought crueler foes cornate cultist marches, gnashing greenskin WAAGH penetrations, murder fenestrated traitors probe attacks but fading galactic history, mandated precisely here relentless Hellas Macragge planes must become their stanchion. For days tabulated endlessly to pacement tolling, St. Helsreach quadrant bell-like chime intervals collapses reported globally, the capital ebbing desperately defect ratio nearing critical thresholds. The Tyranids threw endless bioforms torrents against recalcitrant polar fortresses in relentless, regeneration-perpetuated onslaught. Obscene alien bones piled like macabre shifting artillery ramparts against the permacrate walls, countless shaking viperjaws birds trying snatchpoint sensor towers amid chaotically overlapping swarms, scrabbling relentlessly despite being shredded beneath optimized IFG S-fronts, command tactical dreadnought double-lattice defense systems. The foretelling skull-specific designation warriors fought like heroes, forged in Gilliman's own Forge Soul daybreak. Annihilating Genestealer quarter armies, caught descending glacier cliffs from polar void, feathered genetic dispersal pods positions, they metastatically seized among Titanicus corpses, upon which Tyranid assault traffic congestion broke like turgid, biological currents incapable swift penetration application, rendering entire front lines inevitable melee conditions, sufficient for Terminator armor survivability structural integrity, low relativizing biomass strength ratios at sufficient suppression. Pushing endurance beyond superlative mere defense pronouncements into Collegium Titanicus sacrifice legend terrain, the thunderous roar of bolters, a storm of mass-reactive fury unleashed upon the chitinous horde, echoed like the dying shrieks of worlds across the frozen wastes surrounding Macragge, intercut with the sickening, meaty crunch of power fists rising and falling, smashing through grotesque bodies, spraying ichor that sizzled in the sub-zero air. Each impact was a punctuation mark in a desperate sentence written in alien gore, a testament to the First Company's unyielding stand within the polar fortresses, colossal scarred bastions. Yet the enemy tide was without end, a writhing, snapping river of claws and fangs pouring relentlessly from the glacier caves and the storm-lashed plateau, consuming the Ultramarines' courage with sheer, appalling numbers. The cost even witnessed as fragmented reports flickered across his tactical displays deep within the Ark's fortress on Macragge, weighed upon Marneus Calgar's soul like ceramite-coated lead. His finest warriors, the pride of the chapter, inheritors of Guilliman's own legacy, were being slowly, inevitably torn apart molecule by molecule in the Jotun tundra. The information arriving from the fractured Vox channels painted a picture of pure, grinding attrition. Outer walls breached, kill zones choked with the twitching dead, assault cannon barrels warping under ceaseless fire, ammunition reserves dwindling like lifeblood from a severed artery. He had ordered them there, his guardians of the pole, a calculated risk that was now becoming a grim certainty, the ultimate sacrifice demanded. Warriors priced not in glory, but in the obscene volume of xenos dead they took down before succumbing. His jaw clenched so hard beneath his helm that the servos groaned. There was no other choice. Macragge herself demanded it. The entire benevolent sprawl of Ultramarine depended upon those heroes buying time, holding firm, becoming a bulwark of adamantium and defiance embedded deep in the enemy's flank, anchoring the Tyranid swarm while the greater battle unfolded elsewhere. Their sacrifice had to be absolute, or all was lost. Victory against the ravenous hive mind, however, would not be earned solely by the ground-bound teeth in the ice. Calgar, his mind churning with terrible pressures and calculated fury, saw beyond the visceral carnage consuming his first company. This ground war, this near-suicidal defense, was a macabre lure, a colossal distraction orchestrated by the abominable intelligence infesting the void. The true threat pulsed not in the frozen mud beneath the feet of his dying brothers, but hung heavy and pregnant with unspeakable horror amongst the cold stars. That was where the Hive Fleet's monstrous soul resided, within the colossal, biosculpted leviathans drifting beyond the atmosphere, and that was where Calgar's strategic genius would strike. With a command delivered as cold and hard as the void, the tenor of the war shifted violently. Supported by the sleek, metallic disc-shaped warships of the Imperial Navy, whose lance batteries glowed with building incendiary light, the Ultramarines' fleet ceased its defensive posture against the churning shoals of biofighters and plunged like celestial spears towards the gaping maws of the hive ships themselves. Warships crafted not of steel and fire but swollen flesh and hyperchitin, vast cityscapes of nightmarish biology. Space fractured around them, ablaze with crackling lance fire like novas igniting, the explosive blooms of macrocannon shells detonating against thick hide that excreted layer upon layer of protective bioslurry before them. Kinetic kill vehicles slammed home with tectonic force, cratering living hulls kilometers deep, only for ruptured wounds to seal over moments later with obscene rapidity. The Void War was a whirlpool of shrieking bioships vomiting spore clouds and sleets of living ordnance, Imperial vessels flickering shields ablaze under corrosive torrents, boarding torpedoes loaded with gauntlets of Terminators slamming into pulsating Titans to wage vicious war room to pulsating room. Calgar remained the iron within this cosmic ocean of carnage, unmoved on the bridge of the Macragge's honor, mined a whirlwind targeting arrays and tactical overlays. His orders, precise and devastating, directed the combined might of the Imperial Void Arsenal, not at random biological starships, but surgically targeting the colossal nautiloids serving as synaptic nodes, the decentralized minds guiding the ground assault, radiating psychic commands like foul pollution. Locate them through the synaptic screams, triangulate their obscene brainfires from the flare of their guardian swarms, and concentrate everything on their eradication, purging them with the Emperor's cleansing fire. Without these psychic beacons, the delicate, writhing cord of control stretching down to the world's surface would snap, plunging the surface swarms into voracious, uncoordinated anarchy. And so it was proven true. As the null-space detonations marking the deaths of the great synaptic beasts illuminated the void like blasphemous stars, the effect on Macragge was instantaneous, cataclysmic. The terrifying coordination that had made the Tyranids an unbreakable tsunami vanished, replaced by the spastic, self-destructive twitching of a severed limb. What had been an irresistibly cohesive biological weapon devolved into millions of individual organisms driven by primal hunger and fear alone. Guardsmen and Ultramarines still standing amongst the ruined fortifications saw the change. The advancing tide faltered. The flanking assaults collapsed into chaotic knots as creatures turned on each other, or mindlessly clawed frantically at the ruins without direction. Seizing that fleeting, grief-purchased moment with the ferocity born of vengeance, the bloodied remnants of the Ultramarines and their Imperial auxiliaries unleashed a furious counteroffensive. Tactical squads surged from ruins they had defended for days unending, chainswords shrieking, bolters roaring a death knell. Dreadnoughts lumbered ponderously forward like wounded Godingens, pouring plasma and heavy flamer projectors whose flames seared the frozen wastes, turning scree slopes into rivers of liquid ice and molten chitons smearing across the landscape. Tanks hammered shells directly into the milling confusion. They broke the swarm utterly, shattering the perfect biological machine that had threatened them solely through individual savagery. But grim victory, snatched from the ravening jaws of annihilation, came at a price steepened beyond measure by the blood of the finest. When the thunder finally ceased, when the last whines of dying bioforms faded except for the moan of the polar wind sweeping across eternally altered terrain, when the dense, greasy smoke cleared from the shattered carcasses of the polar fortresses and the blackened ice fields beyond the appalling toll lay bare beneath the cold, silent stars, the First Company was no more, not depleted, not wounded, annihilated, utterly consumed. The magnificent fortresses conceived by Robot Guilliman were unrecognizable, reduced to fire-blackened stumps jutting from glaciers stained purple and ichor black, piled high with the jagged waste of alien bioforms locking together in death like cursed coral reefs. Amongst this colossal charnel pit lay the fallen warriors, their cobalt ceramite cracked and rent, their noble forms contorted in agonies suffered stoically. They sprawled like fallen titans among mountains of alien cadavers, each body a silent monument to duty fulfilled at its most catastrophic extreme. Calgar, surveying the desolation from a gunship flying low over the frozen abattoir, the sallow light of a battered sun glinting feebly on wreckage, felt the immensity of the abyss hollowing him out. He had navigated the most dangerous shoals, he had salvaged Ultramarine, he had routed a hive fleet. His name would be sung as a savior in the smoke-hazed chapels of Imperial shrine worlds. Yet the loss cut with unhealable agony, a psychic wound on his soul mirroring the physical cracks now forever etched into Gorget, the ancient pauldron upon his shoulder. Reconstruction would be the labor of decades, perhaps centuries, the sacrifice of the First Company etched onto the chapter's genetic memory in Calgar's heavy heart, a ghost realm that would throb with every breath until his own death accrued immense interest in the vaults of battle debts. But Ultramarine was saved. Macragge, scarred and bleeding, yet stood defiant, rejecting the appetites of the great devourer. The Tyranid threat, for now, was shattered upon its ice. Yet Calgar felt no cleansing relief, only the bone-deep cold of brutal necessity accomplished. As he walked later through the somber silence of the chapter's colossal ossuary, the newly inscribed name seeming to shimmer accusingly in the muted light, he understood the bitter calculus. This was merely an overture. The Tyranids would return hungrier, angrier. The galaxy was vast and cruel. The Imperium's trials had only deepened. For now, though, Ultramarine stood. Her star fortresses still glittered against the deep void backdrop. Marneus Calgar endured, hardened and scarred profound, an adamantium pillar amidst the encroaching storms. These hard-won gains were merely the prelude to an apocalypse that unfurled across the heavens themselves. The galaxy seemed steeped, drenched in palpable, thickening shadow, profound and horrific. This was more than the mere lightless abyss brought by the cicatrix maledictum, that impossible, seeping wound in the sacred fabric of reality that had cloven the Imperium in twain, a scar, opening directly onto the howling madness of the warp, bleeding chaos and despair like poison into the veins of creation. This felt like the creeping chill of oblivion itself sinking into human souls. It was as though the stars themselves heaved great, agonized cries witnessed only by madmen, their light polluted, their screams unheard except in growing nightmares. From this endless bleeding laceration spilled disorder, fundamental and corrosive, poisoning the celestial ocean. Not merely a storm, the cicatrix maledictum was the throat of hell itself. Its every vibration intensified misery and nurtured decay. And down that throat slid obscene passengers from the realm of chaos. Among them crawled Nurgle, father of plagues, grandfather of corruption, his presence an entropic symphony amplified with the great rift's dire chorus. His vast, distended legions lumbered forth onto bleeding soil, cloven hoof and bloated, leaking body crushing ancient stones beneath their pestilent tread. They advanced not as warriors occupying ground, but as the very essence of contagion personified, their passage leaving clouds of virulent spores and stagnant, rotting waters. Every footfall was a vector, every gasp a fugue of virulent death. They tainted the living core of planets with entropy's loving kiss, metamorphosing worlds into effigies of the Plaguefather's rotted garden. At the head of this pilgrimage of decay rode Mortarion, erstwhile Primarch of the XIV Legion, demon prince of Nurgle, borne aloft upon vast wings of corrupted leather and vile ichor, carrying the pealing funeral knell of hope. Empowered beyond mortal comprehension, radiating loathing palpable enough to curdle light in the air, he saw, through the great rift's seething energies, the chance to ravage the gleaming paragon of imperial resilience, Ultramarine, the jeweled realm governed by his estranged brother Robot Guilliman. The skies above those once pristine systems darkened as the blackened, corroded hulks of the Death Guard plague fleet vomited themselves from the boiling nightmare tides of the warp. Their arrival was preceded not by comet trails, but by virulent spores drifting on the solar winds, a precursor sickness that erupted like wildfire through shipping lanes and agri-worlds. Cities famed for perfect productivity fell silent overnight, streets running thick with the liquefied remains of populace afflicted by flesh-warping maladies. Verdant harvest circles transformed overnight into monotonous scrublands tainted awful color. People whose heritage included millennia of unbroken peace and harmonious prosperity discovered their very environment unconquerably hostile now. The air soured in lungs like spoiled milk, water sources thickened into morasses promising dissolution within an hour. Peace shattered, ruptured like a cyst. Standard weaponry seemed entirely futile. How could lasgun fire purify contaminated ground? How could a bolt shell truly destroy what Death God had gifted undeath? Calgar Lord Macragge, a fortress against despair since the First Tyrannic War, stood ready once more. His life's tapestry was battle scenes, orchestrating defenses against orc waghs, that ground worlds to bedrock, dueling champions against traitor legions sullied beyond redemption upon the Cornid Deep's void-scarred hulls. Yet nothing measured against the visceral, existential horror Nurgle's war brought plowed sunward. The Death Guard resembled walking pestilence, hardly soldiers. Plague marine armor eroded to lace by perpetual secretions, fused with bloated, corrupted flesh. Limbs swollen grotesquely, weaponry dripping caustic payloads that blossomed new agonies upon impact. They were the perpetual dead, sustained in decrepit unlife through warp-sourced gifts that rendered conventional destruction pointless bullets merely opened liquefying pits into which more contagion flowed. Flame's charred features still curled into mockeries of grim mirth amidst the bubbling decay. Worse, far worse, surfaced the demonic legion haunting these walking plague seeds. Manifestations sculpted from primal putrescence, itself crawled and lumbered forth from Nurgle's lapping gardens. Plague-bearers meticulously tallying despair amidst deliquescing stumps. Beasts of Nurgle howling moistly in tumescent agony, joyfully releasing algal blooms of virulent rot. Nurglings, squealing, slippery entities cascaded about firing diseases puncture wounds brought simply proximity. Entire worlds within Ultramarine burned with this cosmic infection, but it was the garden world of Ix, once famed across subsectors for lush fertility, and cascading waterfruit forests termed the vegetable buttery, that became directly sacrificed upon Nurgle's altar. Its fall transformed paradise directly into a visual psalm, announcing entropy supreme. Luxuriant valleys became infernal morasses, festering with fungal towers pulsing off phosphorescent poisons beyond imagination's palate. Rivers corrupted into treaclithic slow poisonols couldn't swim, couldn't settle. Trees grew tumors excised foul liquids. Albino mutant crows clung on skeletal branches. Ix became abattoir-rit planet. Its population multiplied as sickened victims ballooned obscenely with filth-swollen buboes before rupturing into contagion preachers spreading further decay. Through this moonlit lunacy strode bloated Death Guard plague marines, their mere footfalls compressing ground into septic moss. Calgar directed the critical holding action upon poisoned Ix. This struggle plummeted terrifyingly below standard combat parameters. The Ultramarines fought amidst fundamental planetary collapse. Their boots sank inches deep, soil whispered release pockets carrying miasmas, where oxygen molecules broke down rot entered uncovered faceplate seals. Each breath among fumes felt genuinely damaging. Even strong bloodstreams struggled cleanse constant vile microintrusions. Their magnificent genocrafted physiques possessed astounding resilience to toxins. Their armor interred complex filtration and atmospheric recycling systems, yet Nurgle's chaotic pathogens bypassed a bewildering array. Legionaries began contracting debilitating hyperfevers, breaking hazardous fluid depletion without warning, systems scarring internally, yet standing. Calgar personally strode through viscous fog banks, swirling treacherous tangles, battling plague marines, suddenly emerging from swampy banks, wielding virulent thefted scythes. Heavy enough scavengers dismember Ream's metallic howls, saw rasp hitting joints fired ignited bolter shells tearing spongy torso. Shattered bodies wept poisonous discharge nonetheless, reassembling partially hours later if left unattended. Sacrifice squads became essential practice, yet Lord Macragge refused falter. To yield Ix signified surrendering Ultramar entirely heart, surrendered first one path claimed world, and another consumed by diseased collapse. His warriors followed orders matchless exactness assemble cohesion, forged 10-killer discipline against unthinking morasses live hatred fouled land. Tactical precision beheaded devolving threats well-timed charge, a flank crumbling dissolution lessening pressure. But entropy ever wins numbers. Individual Nurgle followers saturated foul, infern manageable largely Terminator ferocity dispatched turret destruction vehicles, moved past mountain corpses. Yet endlessly kept corroded revivification as reinforcement occurring behind combat frontlines assaults. plague constantly renewed itself, infecting sentient survivors, emerged deeper jungles, consciousness, rearranged, spreading narrative Nurgles, planned dominion, perfect hopelessness. Simultaneously, Calgar's strategic mind screamed warning suborbitals, screamed incoming priority alerts, arriving binary bursts, casting ultimate jeopardy pulses. Germination invasion Macragge simultaneously initiated. Death Guard seemed manifest within molecular atmosphere, floating spore clouds, enveloping planetary defense satellite clusters, literally rotting broken orbiting debris, thus directly assault Throat Realm capital. Unguarded, priceless strategic property Nurgle antibodies, piercing circulatory rupture, command structure simultaneously. Mortarian's masterful strategic play, weaken Ultramarine, resolve nurture breaking points, strain resources, overload command layers, vulnerabilities, ripened easily plucked thereafter. Calgar, imbued profound strategic resilience, heavily read chapter Warhammer action grid displays, took immediate resolution, Macragge surrender unforgivable. He issued clipped orders, delegates, trusted captains, implanted urban defense readiness procedure, God Fortress capital, augmented planetary shields, tech meta overhaul, enhanced froth intrigue patterns, impossible potent Astartes fortifications. Commander Captain Sicarius instill 1,000 nerves across whose name alone inspired confidence amongst shattered pranium infestation Ultramarines IX inherited near impossible stalemate. Transfer of command parcels, staggered advance negotiations, contingency, retreat extraction flotilla unnecessary, delay extinguishing hope wretched soil. Calgar prepared transit, surrendering hopeless soil beneath boots. Departure interrupted, catastrophic physical reality disruption, unfolded directly overhead, spreading unnatural darkness colder, still dousing soul warmth, desperately battling legionaries, former smears, sheer primal terror. Appalling dread crashed, oppressive chill in bone marrow, sent shivers through agmatized battle brothers stood shoulder, beside chapter master spun face denizen, descending skies unfettered manifest terror. Mortarian materialized apocalyptic haze, enormous enrobed corrupted plates, wholly fused pus leaking tumor mounds, wings unfurled, vast surfaces, scar tissue membranes, stretched taut strained leather. Silence his infamous imperious cruel scythe cunning shape, curved poignard blade shimmering horror, reflecting distortion, very soul stolen. His footfall blackening instantaneously turf, beneath plague mist flourished advancing, corrupted broadcasted planetary antiseptic cease proliferation ground, appreciably vegetation, instantly expired engineered perfection scaled disseminate death exponentially. Putrefaction Primarch ascended throne Nurgle, corrupted his whisper couldn't sound sock Calgar audible words individual minds scream trapped quaking fume thickened darkness. He knew his essence bombarding cranial sensory nervous system, inducing collapse beyond mere sound. Calgar, Mortarian's mind voice slick threatened overwhelm sanity absorptive charitable embrace desist futility. Your efforts infection advance mortal grains. Comply completion necessary constant perfection. Calgar armored perfected protocols physiological mastery, ignored barrage immaterial vileness, severed psychic hook disconnection systems, dampening abilities, layered blessed purity seals, harder articulated reply steel, imminent impossibility, speaking physical breath contraction, throat corrupted atmosphere, positively choked within helm rebreather tubes. I deny your rot Mortarian, vox distortion slashed thick vapor instant fortress voice discipline solid, stabilizing impact personally heard perimeter, holds partition distance ghost heard command resonance, infused gathered defenders, standard hold unwavering subconsciously. Stand Ultramar virtue oath aspirant administrative defended millennia ultimate darkness, new moment, inevitable side practice maneuver posture, activating legendary gauntlet lightning blast manifestation, indomitable heritage, epitomizing Ultramar heart defiance purified flame. Two entities rectangle truths manifest incompatible thought dual flush meeting molten conflict titanic staggering, might impact seismograph, calibrated tremor collapse unreinforced foundations, miles distant. Leadership chaotically polar visions. Mortarian swept silence impossible replicating segment hyperspeed, corrupted weapons trailing green-black smog trails, slicing through chilled air Calgar, opposite gauntlets enormous shape technology purity counter, rapport every crushing empowered swing emanating purple discharges, earth explosively displaced impact stresses, cracked underlying rock beds, battled armature physical perfection, driven supernaturally fueled mass unbelievable endurance, worn enlightenment, strategic imperatives macrocosmic. Charting galaxy ruin figurehead driven ecstasy dissolution. For time obscure manifestation, shared emotion warrior resilience, exchanged blow shattering shockwave reverberations, titanic embodiments opposing gods deities waging proxy realities. Emperor's noble, savage, unflinching endurance combating plague god degradation, impassioned animation destruction. Calgar, however, possessed raw limits. Primarch severely potentially exceeded physical dread, realized every punishing crack against Calgar's gauntlets transmitted tremor bones, vibrated under assault yielding momentum, furiously blocked, parried, sidestepped, avoid perfect mortal traverse, crushing blow, caught mortal belt, boomeranged, unnaturally weathered adamantium plate, crumpled, partially cratering, retaining structure toughness spar, kept upright, instantly pivotal, silent consideration, calculated, obliterated land raider. Mortarion relentless onslaught, effortlessly shrug average bolter shells, detonated flavorless porous, barely contracted strikes, kicked chitinous outer flesh splits, healed moments, sludge shield true permanent disable, ultimately futile, sustained barely enriched vessels, swiftly corrupted primary hesitating, advances perimeter wall secure fought critical minutes elongated. Stench became unbelievable condensed nerve agent mixture, distilled sorrow, chemical unleashed battlefield Calgar, physically felt telekinetic pressure, hideous grace emanating, decay seeping joints, weariness creeping system, battled biochemistry and psychic assault simultaneously. His counter strikes, though deafening, statically dampened, increasingly fermented surfaces. Mortarion induced constant muted laughter, rhythmic bubbling torture. Weapon swings Calgar despite targeting critical biological junctures, demonic constitution, absorbed trauma, muffled rot, endured ceaselessly. Yet Calgar persisted beneath psychic deluge, crushing unimaginable concurrent commanding defense. Elsewhere remained stoic bulwark, unwavering focus battlefield, less defeating impossible Primarch, buying army's blood future. Each sudden evasion delaying Mortarion moments, precious minutes, hours, seemingly pretending battle ultimate duel, afford commanders critical battlefield manipulation, elsewhere crucial sectors, IX crucial underway. This persistence transcend normal tactical comprehension, underpinning entire theater war, believe strategic brilliance managing defeat personal combat. Tirelessly utilized gathered resources, fighting simultaneous theater plague war. Reinforcements siege breached Macragge, teleported secure strategic bastions, former city defenses, biting engagements, cities power vortex generators, heavily invested planet poison trees. New fought intelligence diagrams, death wave attenuation, conceptual patterns, revealed nodes, concentrated corruption, broadcasted plague cordyceps network clusters, established Mortarion as anchors, stabilization transmission stations, bioenergy sites feeding entities, deeper warp tethering reality, became focal points plague mastery. Precision orbital barrages, calculated insurgency terminators, teleported bracing, thickest infestation melees, cleansing flame, eradicate node-specific tactical strike, focused deployment legions, collapsing Nurgle symptoms, vastly reduced mortal civilians, suddenly stopped liquefying midstride plaguebearer, demonet screaming incohesive tatters, scattered routing uncorrupted areas, secured advancing rapidly unparalleled discipline, persistent advance despite horrific environments, never sought. Lord Mortally ultimately commanded retreat preservation equipment, alongside surviving wastes. Fleet assets dissipated atmospheric curtain poisoning, retreat orbits retaliation, strike crushed destroyer elements, crippled plague fleet route star. Weak sustained attrition, implementing staggering losses, back Death Guard containment, impossible cruise core, inhabiting logistical complex war solutions, resilient, then Empire finally victorious tides, decisively shifted pressure, lifted crushing slowly methodically explosive surgical cadence, mercilessly delivered obliterating deliberately anchor points, severing connectivity plague consciousness planet, thereby enforce fragmentation, amongst Nurgle's intentionally orchestrated resilience, proven weaker than. Core belief benefic empire fortified, resolve impossible physically exhausted plague shattered. Plaguebearers faced systematic elimination, focused bolter discipline, sustained horror through mass volleys coordinated silencing vox impossible. After excruciating months, warfare grinding doom, seemingly limitless persistence chapter prevailed Death Guard fundamentally ruined extent campaign infeasible losses, unsustainable began general collapse momentum gained. Chapter counterattacks fundamental trench lines, overlap decaying language structures, failed Mortarion personally circumvented personal rampage, thwarted multiple theaters, seeing inexorable dissolution, carefully tendrils domination extrusion Balagra reaction, concluded. Strategic necessitating extraction, vowing muted entomological outrage promises reverberations, but withdrew paid considerable price substance temporal realm, beyond ultramar cleansing solidified. Burr's golden light pierced miasma lingering corruption, remained aside literal struggle reappearance conception remain manifestation Tarans full, parked bay tangible felt dark thought city rubble collapsing IX prime example sanctum, utterly transformed hellscape, memorial carved deformations, sacred functional desiccation, stretched horizon isolated effort centuries, pagoda towers, microbial forest, gray substance, structural, where immense biomass-consuming precise specifics land deeply poisoned. Breeze carried spores, adversity-resistant crops, ever abnormality lingering deep plagues, remained contagious spores, permanent blight upon soil, rock, water sources, molecules, purification, vile, impossible, entirely extermination, completed, mitigated, constantly resurged, needing therapeutic suppression protocols, secretly defined, Gilliman, thoughtful, ultimately reconstruction cost, physically broken planet, remained abiding, Calgar, personally survived, sculpted, visibly scarring, interacted, personal. Energy visibly depleted, rapid desensyntheses, organic matter, even before stood command balcony, viewing capital shipyard distributions, crippled the turmoil, ache, emotional wounds, worse significant formations, Imperial Guard, vanished, cried, continent aria, systemic rejuvenation, probably generation, expectation, heroism, bruised, forced, enduring, thoughtful silence, repeated occasions, shadow faction, tentative hove, fresh catastrophe, looming, manifested, center, galaxy ripples, shortcut, empire, soul. System Abaddon gathered impossible power, wielding darkness, fateful reality, awaited inevitable confrontation, predicated centuries, foundation, building framework, imperative, Calgar, understood longevity, cyclical, horrific, repeating template, required staggering persistence, intentions, endurance, steel gar, vigilance, bulwark, encroaching threat, entropy, dawn stood, unmoved, power, confidence, power, will leadership, name, steadfast, ultramarine, defiance, symbol, beacon, resolve, crippled, boundaries, crack, serve, citadel. Stand, discord, untouched, consuming, future, prepared, healed, defenses, spelled, ultimate invocation, star gods lament, arrival, despair, regularly forbidding, universe, entire existence, sees, protection, lives, entrusted, living embodiment, determination, immortality, memory, Gideon, specter, guarding, against the perilous promise, ending light, forever dimmed, Imperium nihilus, eclipsed, struggled, longer, reliable, galactic travel, Calgar, remained, foundation, never faltered, preparations, eternal vigilance. The suffocating silence that followed the transmission hung thicker than the void mist clinging to the battle barge's armored pelt. Cadia had fallen. The words weren't just news, they were the sound of the galactic axis fracturing, the shattering report tearing through the stratagem like a physical blow. Hope wasn't merely dented, it lay in jagged, irreparable tatters. For 10,000 terrible years, Cadia had been the linchpin, the adamantium plug driven deep into the festering, bleeding wound in reality that was the Eye of Terror. Its warriors, granite against entropy, had faced the unending nightmare shift after shift, a watch never broken. They held back the tides of gibbering madness, a dam against the raw sewage of chaos spilling into the stars. And now, silence where the battle's roar should have echoed. The unthinkable had occurred. The bastion was dust and shadows. The transmission detailing Cadia's death throes, the last defiance atomizing before the wrath of Abaddon and his Black Legion, etched itself onto the viewing screens and into the minds of Marneus Calgar and his Ultramarines officers, stationed far from that doomed crucible, yet suddenly feeling its icy cold breath upon them. Calgar stood anchored before the main display, a statue carved from grief and defiance, hands clamped white-knuckle behind his back, his face a mask that revealed as little as his ancient Terminator plate, yet the weight in the air crushed like gravity incarnate. Around him, the murmured speculations of his captain's veterans, sculpted by war, known names like Sicarius and Aegimen, were hushed funereal dirges, choked with the visceral, marrow-deep understanding of loss. Cadia wasn't just a planet, a border fortress. It was the bedrock certainty, the living symbol of the Imperium's unyielding endurance. Its fall wasn't merely a defeat, it was the unraveling of a foundational myth. If Cadia could shatter, what buckling bastion remained? What fortress wall could ever feel secure again? But Marneus Calgar, High Lord of Terra, chapter master of the Ultramarines, felt that same crushing sorrow, that same tremor of cosmic dread, yet within the bedrock of his being something adamantine held. The Imperium, this ancient, wounded beast, had faced oblivion's maw countless times. Blood soaked its annals thicker than ink, despair painted its twilight skies, yet still it endured. The Ultramarines themselves were testament to that, holding the hot galactic flanks against ruin as long as stars burned. Cadia's fall was a grievous wound, a puncture to the very soul, but it was not the death knell. With deliberate slowness, he turned away from the screen, the image of expanding warp fire and fracturing rock fading with the movement. His voice cut through the suffocating gloom, smooth and resonant as chapel iron, yet carrying the quiet thunder of orbital deployment. The Emperor's light still burns, he stated, each syllable precise and hard, his storm-grey eyes scanning the room, meeting the doubt, absorbing the fear, refusing it purchase. We will not falter. A deliberate pause, letting the declaration settle like consecrated dust. Cadia has fallen, but we will hold. Ultramar will hold. Silent nods met his words, disciplined and automatic, yet the undercurrent of terror remained, a palpable aura thick enough to taste. They weren't fools, they knew the math of the nightmare. The Eye of Terror, unchained at last from Cadia Gate's impossible bindings, had ripped open like a septic wound unleashed. Its malignant growth surged outward at an inconceivable rate, tearing the cosmic fabric, vomiting forth warp storms that shredded star lanes, disgorging vast chaos armadas with the despoiler himself at their head, already scouring whole worlds bare to the bedrock. Yet Calgar's gaze was fixed firmly on Ultramar. More than a domain, it was his heart, his sacred sphere, a constellation held by will and discipline against the encroaching chaos. The pride of his legion lay in their steadfastness, in being the unbreakable rock against the endless psychic tides, a beacon of rationality in an insane universe. Now, with the dilated eye gnashing at its perimeter, that peace, that stability was balanced on the razored edge. The loss wouldn't just be measured in parsecs lost or populations devoured. If Ultramar dimmed, the Imperium would lose its brightest hope flame, the proof that order wasn't just possible, but vital. Hesitation was betrayal. Calgar moved. His summons went out like bolts, gathering his captain's heroes forged in traitor fire and xenos infernos. The defense of Ultramar became a singular, overriding creed. Every planet, from orbital fortress monasteries bristling with Nova cannon batteries to agri-worlds shimmering with vital verdure, from Forge worlds hammering out dark starships to the regal cities of Macragge itself, all were plunged into immediate, electrified high alert. The power fields hummed higher. Lance batteries tracked imaginary targets, reserves assembled under Gungry skies. This was no mere border patrol, it was the activation of an intricate latticework defense, a macrosymphony orchestrated for unimaginable dissonance. Coordination wasn't a luxury, it was the only shield. The forces beyond the rifts were ferocity incarnate, predictable only in their unpredictable savagery, attacks driven by babbling hungers and nightmare visions, not strategy or logistics. Calgar knew their entropy. He breathed the Codex Astartes, lived its disciplined verse. Robout Guilliman's great treatise wasn't just parchment, it was generations of distilled strategic truth, its precepts etched into his every thought and reflex. Here, within its structured perfection wrapped in pragmatic flexibility, lay the counterscript for annihilation. Trust in the Codex, Calgar would emphasize, standing before the stratagem table like a commander from ancient texts, the holographic representations of Ultramar's stars swirling around him. But adapt where necessity dictates. Guilliman forged it as a torch, not a chain. We illuminate our path by its fire and smash our enemies with its lessons. Fleets assembled in silent phalanxes above its worlds. Armies marched through precincts echoing with the hymns of orbital defense lasers cycling up. Calgar's orders rained down with devastating precision, a maestro marshalling instruments against the encroaching sonic holocaust. The bloated eye, its edges hemorrhaging unreality, threatened nearby systems with chaotic digestion. And chaos, ever hungry, ever cruel, wasted no time testing the Ultramar locks. Before long, the ghostlight signatures of Death Guard vessels, pus yellow and rotting from the inside out, blemished the void on Ultramar's perimeter. Plague-choked whispers preceded them, viral tides washing over sensoriums, heralds of decay and despair. Calgar's mind encompassed the vast tapestry of worlds under his protection, serene ocean paradises, hive cities echoing 10 million lives, pasture lands nurturing entire subsectors. Ultramar was no cold asset listing. It was the living expression of fragile hope, the shining argument for order itself in a reality tearing at the seams. Each bolter discharged on its soil, each kilometer stubbornly denied the foul invaders, was a prayer for the Imperium's living spirit, fought for its very essence, its reason for enduring. Heresy crashed against the bulwarks Calgar raised with fierce determination. Fortress walls groaned under psychic assault. Orbital docks shimmered with void shield overloads. Yet even as the forces of entropy surged and Ultramar strained under the awful pressure, a spark ignited in the darkest corner of the void, impossible and dazzling. Whispers came first, disjointed vox-crackle snippets caught on the farthest astropathic relays by librarians frowning over fading candles. Legends stirred, named from 10 millennia of suspended legend. The whispers coalesced, gaining undeniable substance, relayed from worlds at the edge of Ultramar's sphere. The impossible had manifested. Robout Guilliman, the Lord of Macragge, Primarch of the Ultramarines, architect of the very Codex Calgar had wielded as scripture, he lived. Among the myriad battleships bristling like spines on a void leviathan, the news struck Marneus Calgar with the force of a neutron lance. Guilliman, the progenitor, the demigod whose genetic blueprint ran in Calgar's own blood. Mortally wounded by the treacherous Fulgrim, entombed in holy stasis deep within the Sanctum Sanctorum on Macragge, a wound that defied all science, all prayer, preserved in a state that was neither life nor death. Millennia had passed. The stasis field was less a healing sarcophagus now and more a monument, a relic of a bygone age. Few truly believed the living Primarch could walk again, save in myth or fevered dreams. And yet, confirmed from multiple sources, Guilliman lived. Brought back through a miracle mingling ancient xenos sorcery, and the desperate brilliance of Belisarius call a resurrection forged as the very sky tore itself asunder. The Primarch walked, returned, king of Ultramar. His presence was not merely astral comfort, it was reality yielding before the improbable. Calgar, Lord High Commander, himself built from strength and legend, felt the sheer archaic weight of the moment crush his usual reserve, his Genefather. The foundational stone upon which the entire Ultramarine legacy, his own purpose, his faith, his strategies was meticulously erected, was not cold marble carved into myth, not faded ink script on sacred vault walls. He breathed, he thought, he commanded, as if the fractured cosmic expanse itself had aligned, piercing the lightless pall that had consumed creation, a supernova igniting in the heart of the long night. Language rigidly calibrated for tactical reports and war proclamations utterly failed. There would be no pronouncement fit, only duty, only readiness presenting itself. Calgar steeled his spirit, composing himself for a confrontation with the cornerstone of his existence. Within Macragge's towering halls, echoing with the solemn silence of ages, where victory banners hung like the hide of long-slain titans from vaulted ceilings lost in pale light, and the air hung perpetually with the scent of tectonically compressed iron and flaking Millennium scrolls, Marneus Calgar stood once more before Robot Guilliman. The sheer scale of the act resonated to be in the physical presence of a Primarch was staggering enough to stand before this legend, returned from beyond the edge of redemption, from the precipice of history itself into tangible, vital reality, dwarfed mere human comprehension. Guilliman, the insurmountable strategist, the architect, the very soul poured into the vessel called Ultramarines, was not a plate etched on the Temple of Correction, not a doctrinal citation recited in prayer. He was present, alive. The eyes that scanned Calgar held the galaxy's terrible burden, sharp and analytical as any blade forged on Mars, ancient knowledge warring with the immediacy of unfolding collapse. Yet confronting this sheer archetype of transhuman potential, this reborn titan, Calgar felt an unexpected stability. There was a place. There had always been his place, irrevocably bound to this being, this Primarch, not by fragile memory, but by genetic certainty and strategic imperative, whether Guilliman slumbered beneath the mountain or walked the stars. Now, with the Cicatrix Maledictum splitting heaven fire like the Emperor's own scar across the firmament, and the Imperium unraveling fiber by fiber into scattered terror worlds, that place solidified into unbreakable adamantium. The galaxy burned with fear. Calgar distilled lessons long ago branded upon his soul. The deeper the chasm of despair, the deeper the well of resolve must be drawn. The abyss demanded it. And resolve, the Ultramarines authored volumes in that particular lexicon. Together, Primarch and Proconsul, the ancient foundation and the modern bastion, surveyed the galactic inferno. It resembled more than studying star charts. It was cartography of devastation, surveying a crumbling, blood-drenched star map, each sector a fresh wound. Worlds screamed in desperate vox bursts. Fleets careened through the Empyrean like broken toys. Yet their joint strategy unfolded not through frantic scrambling or anguished fury, but with a terrifying, glacially calm precision. Calgar perceived it in Guilliman's gaze, a familiar light, the same fierce, indomitable intellect that had once forged 500 bloody worlds into Ultramar 10,000 years past amidst the Sawblood Crusade. And Calgar himself, heir to that fire though tempered by smaller cosmic kilns, drew deep upon its reflected core heat. Reorganizing the Imperial defense network felt not like command, but like diverting tectonic plates while volcanic ash choked the skies, like steering a sundered battleship deep within a warped tempest fathoms deep. Guilliman, however, navigated Lost Terra's ruin with intellect sharper than any auspex, seemingly reading meanings from the screaming void static itself. His ancient strategic mind mapped impossibilities. Calgar trusted without reservation. Ultramar remains the harbor of reason within this tempest, Guilliman stated, his voice neither booming nor soft, bedrock steady, each word measured and weighed like precious strategic intelligence gathered at grievous cost. We shield its inhabitants, yes, but it becomes more, a beacon, a necessity. The Imperium clawing its way back requires something absolute to witness. They need tangible, observable hope. Calgar's grim nod was agreement etched into his very stance. His thoughts expanded, encompassing Ultramar's gleaming worlds, jewels held against the bleak interstellar canvas, jewels now fractured, some darkened utterly by chaos's cancerous touch. The task horizon stretched impossibly, a light-year-thick mountain range of siege and rebirth and sacrifice. Impossible. Yet Calgar, whose life was epitomized by impossible labor performed with unflinching resolve, felt it a tangible surge coursing through his fatigue-drenched marrow, a renewed sense of foundation where before only the precipice gaped. A measure of order, however brutally extracted, would be reclaimed. Guilliman's return was the blueprint. The Primarch was the indomitable will. Calgar was the armored fist, bringing it down with relentless force. The first campaign front declared itself. Ultramar must stand, healed and hardened. The plague wars had scarred deeply, Though Nurgle's pestilential legions were beaten back from the fortress of Hera, the grotesque fingerprints of decay remained. Macragge's cities still reared like fists against the sky, born Scrivendum, honorable Tarantus, proud Numidium icons enduring. Further out, however, worlds were broken gardens. Verdant continents, formerly yielding abundant riches, lay scabbed gray and rot-fetid, or choked beneath alien necrotic intergrowths. Rivers that once sang down clean mountain valleys now oozed sludge capable of corrupting adamantium. Calgar knew portcullises raised, and bastions patched amounted only to preliminary stitching. The defenses needed flesh on scarred bone. It's more than the fortress walls that must be made whole, Calgar observed somberly, pacing the immense stone ramparts of the fortress of Hera alongside his Primarch. The ever-present Macragge wind, sharp as shattered obsidian, carried distant rhythmic clangs echoing across the plateau, the sound of reconstruction hammering against despair. It's the spirit of Ultramar. Remind them of the core within each soul taken by despair. Grant them proof of hope, and the people will reconstruct stone and steel through sheer remembered defiance. Guilliman's response was a fleeting, profound expression, erased as swiftly as it arrived, replacing measured contemplation. I have always maintained belief in their fundamental integrity. The Primarch's calm tenor rang out clear in the cold air. But such construct requires leadership to excavate. They require visible, undeniable proof that the core of Ultramar stands inviolate. Thus, beyond the simple logistics of alloy plate and weaponized void crystal flex, the Ultramarines delved into the reconstruction of souls. Across the sprawling, traumatized worlds and shattered colonies that formed the domain, operators became architects of faith again. They labored alongside civilians amid scorched city skeletons and blighted steppes, their stark blue battleplate clashing against the gray ruins and poisoned mud, where artisans wrestled plasteel beams back towards foundations, where farmers dared to sow dubious seeds into soil that rejected life, where governors reorganized fractured communities clinging to righteous fury. Every stratum of Ultramarian society poured itself into rekindling the flame. Marneus Calgar moved among these crucibles of renewal, his imposing presence a constant anchor. A silent vow etched in ceramite and gravitas, the stone-faced chapter master anchored firm amidst the tides of reconstruction, undeniable proof that abandonment was a lie, that the Guardians had never departed. Ultramar stirred, hurt yet awakening. But rebuilding the bulwark beneath the Ultramar standard was merely the pressuring prologue. Robout Guilliman had returned not solely for his hearthworlds. Indomitus, the thunderbolt name of the Primarch's monumental counter-crusade, resonated with terrifying scope. The greatest campaigns ever conceived and executed were planned here. Calgar, surveying unfolding holograms, generating vast strategic labyrinths as rich in menace as they were ambition, comprehended the staggering reality. Holding the fortress had been crucial always. Journeying back into the Tempest, outside its guarded embrace, to tug fragments of the Imperium itself back from annihilation's edge, that demanded a courage bordering on transient human brilliance, tempered by immortal strategy. Guilliman, timeless masterplaner, was already dissecting whole segmentums, systems painted scarlet by chaos, worlds convulsing under warp tide shifts or drowned by the cicatrix maledictum's violent birth throes, entire galactic districts sunk into anarchy following Cadian foundations vaporizing. To reclaim the scattered, bleeding soul of mankind required that Guilliman's indomitable will combine with Calgar's unwavering force. Cadia had fallen. Its fall had sundered the cosmos. But Ultramar stood, not just defiant, rebuilding and forging a bastion against the night capable of launching retribution and restoration into the center of the apocalypse itself. The loss remained crushing, a chasm echoing impossible emptiness. Yet within the bleakest inferno and the fortresses rising anew across Ultramar, beneath the gaze of heroes reborn and marching forth, a hard certainty took root. The fight continued, not solely for enduring the sunset, but demanding the return of light. The sheer magnitude of reclaiming a shattered galaxy, rescuing it from the jaws of ruinous chaos, demanded infinitely more than simple brute force could offer. Victory on such an apocalyptic scale, world after broken world, was a colossal tapestry woven not just with fire and steel, but with threads of meticulously crafted strategy, flawless coordination between countless moving parts, and the unyielding, bedrock resolve that defined Ultramar. Primarch Robout Guilliman and Chapter Master Marneus Calgar approached this Herculean undertaking not with urgency, but with a chilling, methodical determination, the same formidable steadiness that had seen their beloved Ultramar stand defiant through centuries, even millennia of unrelenting trials. Calgar, of course, far from being merely a passive observer to this epical effort, transformed into Guilliman's indispensable right hand, his trusted lieutenant in every conceivable aspect of the war. The Primarch's visionary mind charted the grand course of the crusade, mapping out the sweeping strokes of salvations across the star charts, while Calgar became the relentless engine, translating that vision into palpable reality. He took personal charge of the deployment of the Primaris Marines, those towering, awe-inspiring warriors sculpted by the genius of Belisarius Cawl, scrutinizing tactical hololiths with a veteran's eye to position each formidable squad where their enhanced strength could deliver maximum impact, where their presence could tip the precarious balance of battles yet unfought. His tireless focus extended to the vast, sprawling armadas of the Imperial Navy, a labyrinthine logistical nightmare made manifold by distance and warp peril. Calgar immersed himself in manifests, communiques, and fleet disposition charts, ensuring every cruiser, every escort, every troop transport was battle-ready, fueled, armed, and positioned for the cataclysmic engagements promised on the horizon. And when the sirens blared final warnings and the void blossomed with weapons fire, Calgar was always there physically present, leading the charge from the absolute fiercest point of contact, roaring orders over the cacophony of bolter fire and plasma discharge. His formidable Terminator armor, often the first beacon of blue and gold the enemy saw before oblivion claimed them. He led with that ingrained, unshakable courage that had become his hallmark, the same stoic defiance that had anchored humanity through the desperate, plague-scarred years preceding the Primarch's return. Though the sheer, abyssal weight of the challenges piled upon them sometimes felt overwhelming, enough to crush the spirit of even the mightiest Ultramarine Legion, Calgar remained immutable. The legions of chaos spewed forth with nauseating relentlessness, an infinite tide of corrupted flesh and screaming demonic. The galaxy itself groaned under the strain, spitting warp storms across vital routes, worlds fracturing like rotten fruit, celestial fragments littering the void. In those fleeting, corrosive moments when doubt, that insidious poison, dared to slither into the mind's darkest corners, Calgar's eyes would inevitably find Guilliman. And there, reflected in the Primarch's stern, unblinking gaze, Calgar would perceive that same incandescent core of conviction, that unwavering imperative to stand, to endure, to resist, to prevail against impossible odds, no calculation too grim to yield to. The bond forged between Guilliman and Calgar transcended the cold calculus of military hierarchy. It was welded equally from adamantium duty and deep, hard-won mutual respect. Guilliman, despite his transhuman superiority as a son of the Emperor, never casually dismissed Calgar's immense wealth of lived experience or his battlefield-honed insights. Indeed, he actively sought them. Countless times, amidst the flickering stratagem lights, Guilliman would turn deliberately to his chapter master, soliciting his counsel, placing profound trust in the wisdom Calgar had accumulated not through theoretical study, but through visceral decades of sacrifice spilled across innumerable battlefields strewn with debris and broken Astartes. And Calgar, in turn, felt an unbreakable, almost devotional loyalty toward his Primarch, extending far beyond the obedience owed to a commander. Guilliman, for Calgar, was the living embodiment of Ultramar, of its unwavering pragmatism, its disciplined strength, its dimly remembered promise of rational order in a universe spiraling into madness. Together, they formed a command nexus of unparalleled power, a rare beacon of enduring hope radiating piercingly through a galaxy where darkness seemed the only absolute. As the titanic gears of the Indomitus Crusade ground inexorably forward, carving paths through the smoldering ruins of lost systems, and striving to impose a semblance of shattered order upon the fractured Imperium, Calgar and Guilliman stood perpetually side by side. Their partnership became symbolic, a stark monument of imperial resilience and unassailable strength silently erected against the encroaching dark. Even as the furious storm of unending war wailed and shrieked around them, consuming stars and civilizations alike, they remained defiantly unbroken, guiding the faltering Imperium through the gathering cataclysm with the same deep-seated stability, that same granite-like steadiness that had anchored them through the bloody millennia preceding. The stars, though seeming infinite in their cold, distant splendor, felt frustratingly remote, impossibly far, as the formidable fleets of the Indomitus Crusade ignited their drives on a journey stretched agonizingly long and fraught with perils unimaginable across the unthinkable gulfs of the galaxy. This was an era steeped in profound darkness, stained by the acrid smoke of devastated worlds and the bitter tang of extinguished hopes lying like grave dust. Yet paradoxically, deep within the flickering, wounded heart of the Imperium itself, a long-dormant ember had flared back into roaring, defiant life. That life-giving flame was Robout Guilliman, the resurrected Primarch, whose miraculous emergence had struck mankind like a thunderbolt, igniting blinding awe alongside tremors of fervent, almost superstitious fear. His purpose was transcendent, not solely to wage war, though war was inevitable, but to grapple with the geist of the Imperium's festering wounds, to suture together the massive rents caused by millennia of superstition and betrayal. Thus, the Indomitus Crusade was born under his stern mandate, a breathtakingly vast campaign designed to wrest order back from the gibbering jaws of anarchy wherever it held dominion. Beside him, as steadfast as the mountain ranges of Macragge, stood Marneus Calgar, the guardian of Ultramarine, who had weathered every conceivable tempest that had crashed against his domain's ancient shores. Calgar's duties had now exploded into something truly galactic. His vigilance was no longer confined by the proud boundaries of the 500 worlds. The Indomitus Crusade represented something far grander, far deeper, than the mere clash of swords and the roar of cannon. It was, at its core, a perilous pilgrimage driven by fragile hope, a striving towards spiritual renewal whispered against the dying light, and perhaps whispered faintest of all, a profound yearning for redemption. In this monumental, soul-stretching work, Calgar's qualities, his unflappable competence, his meticulous shepherd's care for the aftermath, his inherent understanding that victory without governance was a hollow, fleeting thing, became assets as vital to the crusade as the devastating strength he unleashed upon the battlefield in Terminator Plate. The crusade itself unfolded across the lightless ocean of the void like a voyage of mythical proportions, threading its way through warp and real space from one screaming, forgotten fringe of the Imperium to the other. Commanding such an endeavor was an operation of mind-boggling complexity, a realization hammered home daily by the sheer, terrifying scale of the Imperial domain. Entire sectors, vast swathes of star systems, had slid into monstrous ruin, pitilessly severed from Terra's distant light and each other by howling warp tempests and merciless incursions from myriad xenos horrors. Yet steered by the commanding intellect of Guilliman, the armada that comprised the Indomitus Crusade pressed relentlessly onward, a monolith grinding through resistance, perpetually driving forward like an unquenchable tide, ever seeking to cast imperial light to banish the deepest, most suffocating voids of despairing darkness. They encountered worlds forever sundered from reality, drifting half in, half out of the maddening currents of the Empyrean, their populations long surrendered to oblivion, ancestral calls for aid echoing, unheard into an uncaring abyss for centuries. They confronted planets savaged beyond recognition by the vile forces of chaos, where cities lay as skeletal remains amidst toxic swamps, skies churning eternally with volcanic ash and the psychic pollution of demonic occupation, the very air thick with the stench of decay and corruption. But wherever the might of the crusade fell, Guilliman and Calgar arrived as bearers of an incandescent promise, the promise of imminent renewal, a chance to scrape the blight of apostasy from the crumbling stones. Guilliman understood with supreme strategic clarity that mere military reclamation, the simple act of planting the Aquila back onto blasted plazas, was utterly insufficient. Areas they liberated demanded restoration. The crumbling foundations of imperial rule law, infrastructure, communication, faith needed deliberate, intricate reconstruction brick by endured brick. And so, interwoven with the thunderous crescendo of every battlefield victory, there commenced a quieter, yet no less critical symphony of rebuilding, clearing mountains of rubble, re-establishing fractured administratum links, meticulously reforging the seals of imperial governance, and perhaps most crucially, whispering assurances, faint but persistent, to shattered populations that Terra had not finally abandoned them to perish alone in the encroaching night. The crusade stretched on, an eternity measured in battles and light years, the journey fraught with unspeakable dangers lurking within every parsec traversed. Yet Guilliman remained an icon of unwavering resolve, his gaze perpetually fixed beyond the immediate carnage, always scanning the storm-lashed horizons of possibility, his monumental intellect already dissecting the tactical requirements of the next contested star system, the next embattled world gasping on the precipice. And beside him, Calgar maintained his constant, silent vigil, a bastion of rock-solid reliability, unwavering dedication radiating from him like heat from a forge, loyalty to his Primarch etched as deeply into his being as the battle scars upon his ancient armor. Although the sweeping vision defining the Indomitus Crusade belonged utterly to Guilliman, it was Calgar who translated abstract strategy into concrete, bloody victories. It was his practiced, honed tactical acumen that repeatedly turned the grinding wheels of potential disaster towards decisive triumph. His unique skill encompassed not merely prodigious personal combat prowess, best exemplified within the unyielding shell of the gauntlets of Ultramarine, but a profound, almost instinctive understanding of how to inspire and direct men when the battlefield dissolved into deafening, blinding carnage. One particularly harrowing demonstration of this occurred during the protracted and brutal battle for the Carthus sector. This entire region of space had been ruthlessly subjugated under the spiked fist of chaos for generations seemingly unnumbered, its world subjected to grotesque mutation, massive corruption bleeding reality itself, the people ground deep into a state of dull, hopeless terror. Its cities were little more than decaying monuments to entropy, its skies perpetually polluted with the unnatural, sickening hues echoing the warp's broiling madness. When the Indomitus fleets finally emerged from the roiling tides of the warp onto Karthus's lightless frontier, the situation stood resembling sheer impossibility. The agents of chaos seemed too deeply rooted, too understanding of their twisted terrain, their defenses strengthened by millennia of madness, their numbers seemingly beyond measure. However, Calgar possessed a Pathfinder's uncanny knack for locating fracture points. He eschewed the temptation of a glorious, head-on assault, refusing to shed ultramarine blood, simply battering against heavily fortified bastions soaked in sacrilegious runes. Equally, he knew brute force attrition favored the implacable darkness. Instead, he spun a web of tactical deception. His stratagem employed controlled feigned retreats executed with masterful precision, deliberately luring the chaos forces into abandoning the relative safety of their profaned strongpoints, scattering their savage hordes across treacherous open ground deliberately chosen, and creating pockets of disorganization out of what looked like an unstoppable wave. Then when the critical moment shimmered on the razor's edge, identification only possible for a mind like Calgar, he unleashed the crushing counterblow. Ultramarines, augmented by cohorts of implacable Primaris, struck with devastating swiftness and finality, maneuvering with fluid coordination exhibiting the supreme tactical discipline honed by Romic's inheritance, cutting down the fragmented chaos forces piecemeal before they could react with coherent malice. The victory secured in the Karthus sector resonated far beyond the tactical. It meant liberation for billions whose despair had become a world-woven shroud. Yet Calgar's duty extended beyond driving the enemy before him. Once the guns fell silent and the echoes of battle subsided, he lingered. He personally oversaw the grim work beginning the restoration of Karthus, ensuring the worlds wrested from the abyss were rebuilt with stronger, more resilient institutions, their people safeguarded against the inevitable shadows seeking a return. This exhaustive attention to the protracted aftermath, this fundamental grasp that the fight extended far beyond the cessation of immediate bloodshed defined Calgar's indispensability to the Crusade's deepest purpose. Even amidst the crushing demands of campaigning light centuries distant, Calgar's consciousness frequently plunged back towards Ultramar like a needle magnetically drawn. Though secure under watchful regiments and his capable subordinates, its borders pulsed constantly under threatening pressure. Orc wags. Massed with bestial hunger along distant quarantine lines, paraical xenos raiders probed exposed flanks like insidious parasites seeking weakness, and the eternal cancer of chaos slowly leached into neighboring systems, tainting from within. Calgar understood intrinsically that his foundational oath bound him first and always to the protection of Ultramar and its people. Thus, even as his boot fell upon fields of battle on outlying galactic battlefields, a portion of his mind remained locked on the defense grids and logistical networks shielding his cherished 500 worlds. The most pronounced threat coalescing demanded personal intervention. Orc warbands gathering insidious momentum on Ultramar's vulnerable frontier, their numbers swelling like a localized plague. These brutal adversaries existed only to despoil, destroy, reveling in apocalyptic sprees that left worlds as species graveyards. Calgar foresaw unchecked, their avalanche of violence would inevitably crash over Ultramar's borders, consuming worlds he had sworn sacred vows to protect, crushing them beneath a tide of crude weaponry and gnashing teeth. Calibration of response required this confluence. While the Crusade demanded colossal resources elsewhere, the threat demanded his personal input. He orchestrated a sequence of precisely timed, brutally punishing preemptive strikes deep into the Orc gathering grounds. His fleets appeared where the greenskin warlords felt most secure amidst shambolic asteroid bases and debris encampments, striking with relentless fury calculated to dismember their nascent fleets before they achieved coordinated mobility. These were ferocious engagements, brutal wars of attrition fought void to void and world to world, for Orcs possessed a terrifying metabolic capacity to absorb loss and generate renewed threats almost instantly from the savage survivors. Yet combined with Calgar's tactical elegance that exploited greenskin recklessness thrillingly to their own detriment, and the incomparable martial discipline of the Ultramarines ensuring maximum destruction per Imperial unit deployed, every onslaught was met with overwhelming retaliation until the disparate bands were shattered, scattered into isolated remnants easily mopped up. Ultramar's borders flared brightly secure once more. Its people could taste fleeting respite knowing steadfast vigilance never wavered, yet the malignancy of chaos remained unslaked. Its tendrils, dripping corrosive influence, sought footholds continuously within systems adjacent to Ultramar, seeding rot from within through corrupted officials and whispering cultist networks promising impossible salvation. Calgar led strike forces time after brutal time, breaching fortified positions, purging venerated shrine worlds screaming with heresy, boarding ships drifting as plague-infested tombs, waging war not merely for territorial conquest, but for the sanctity of the Imperium's fundamental soul, resisting entropy one purging blast at a time. Every triumph extracted a toll measured in bolter shells and sacrifice, leaving yet another stained plaque, memorializing heroes in the halls of heroes upon Macragge. Yet each confirmed victory also edged the crusade fractionally closer towards its monumental goal, securing Ultramar's shield extended infinitely, becoming synonymous with safeguarding the future of the Imperium entire. The Indomitus Crusade unfolded not as a song, but perhaps as a millennia-long dirge punctuated by explosions. It sprawled vast like the void itself, and brimmed with grief carved upon legionary morning chimes. Yet, for every blazing world touched by liberation, alleviating the shadow of despair, a survivor's hope rekindled, however faintly. Through the accumulated decades of this grinding, stellar siege, Marneus Calgar remained the living avatar of fortitude. He manifested not merely as a supreme warrior within legendary artificer armor, nor solely as a master tactician directing legions, but as a steadfast beacon radiating sheer willpower, a foundation stone unyielding, while torrential psychic storms screamed across void. His presence became a palpable force replicated across the dizzying theaters of conflict. On the eager bridge of flagship Macragge's honor, pinning targets with grim precision. Deep within subterranean vaulted command bunkers humming with stratagem data feeds, where only the finest interpretations determined planetary salvation. Amidst the shell-raked, mud-choked hellscape of frontline trench networks, rallying raw guard regiments already slipping toward dread. And in the reborn settlements, raising edifices upon scorched earth as silent testament to endurance, his steadfastness became myth, woven into the very narratives tattooed onto liberated souls. And so this vast, ceaseless cavalcade of battles and reconstruction pressed tenaciously onward, ever adrift amidst the glimmers drowning in an ocean of stars. The voyage stretched toward horizons unreachable by mortal plotting, yet Calgar walked confident they carved the righteous passage. With Guilliman's luminous intellect illuminating the unthinkable scope ahead, and the immense, disciplined, sacred might of the entire Ultramarines brotherhood forming an unbreakable wall at his back, no psychic maelstrom could overwhelm them. No shadow had grown black enough to extinguish their defiant light. For the Imperium of mankind, despite weeping from wounds that might inadvertently cripple a lesser species 100 times over, still roared survival against deadly silence. And so long as souls steeled equivalent to Marneus Calgar endured, chainsword ever raised against encroaching horror, its Aquila would find surfaces to climb, ascending always. Yet the galaxy churned beneath the Crusade's long-shadowed march. Amidst the staggering battles and Guilliman's ambitions stretching stars, a profound transformation enveloped the Imperium, powerful enough to send shockwaves through the bedrock traditions, binding every Adeptus Astartes chapter scattered from the obscure fringes of Segmentum Pacificus to the very core sanctums lying beneath Holy Terra itself. This convulsive shift heralded the full arrival of the Primaris Marines. They stood vividly taller, functionally stronger, intrinsically more genetically formidable than even the celebrated heroes of the first founding treated now as revered ancestors. This overt evolution brought cascading questions crackling through the vox networks of legion equivalents darkened by tradition, rippled profound existential unease, and birthed trials demanding unprecedented integration. For Marneus Calgar, whose very existence had become synonymous with managing transformation while bearing unimaginable burdens of guardianship, this unveiling was replete with tangible promise stretching unchecked towards legacies, imagined previously solely within myth, yet simultaneously. It kindled deep currents of introspective contemplation beneath his practiced unemotional command facade. It was Belisarius' call, the ancient Archmagos Dominus, whose lifetime spanned epochs untouched by mortal generations, who formally presented these enhanced warriors before a stunned Imperium. The Primaris Marines constituted far more than mere infantry, rolled from assembly bolts on Mars. They embodied the culmination of genetic manipulation protocols, locked away meticulously over untold millennia. They manifested a tangible vision, what the Adeptus Astartes could become, distilled to purity, unburdened by slowly accumulating clades of weakness inherent to longer-established brethren. Towering significantly over their firstborn kin, armor plates gleaming sleeker and more lethally profiled in glorious new ceramite-tableau, their enhanced physiology resonated with augmented strength, unprecedented resilience already biologically baked in, reaction times approaching preternatural thresholds observable only in deified ancestors. The first encounter Marneus Calgar experienced within their ranks induced perhaps betrayal from memory itself. They seemed like figures resurrected directly from sacred coded archive evids, echoes of ancient monsters sculpted anew the demigod companions, who strode alongside legend parents during the mythical era known merely as the Great Crusade. Yet eyes betrayed inherent unfamiliarity, despite shared genocide markers reaching towards familial tie. They harbored, however diminished humanity, could conceive unholy vows that glittered coldly within uniquely engineered pupils, loyalty implacable as bedrock, zeal burning white-hot as plasma vents flaring, but across immeasurable gulfs carrying a veneer of innate foreign expectation, or perhaps Germanian strangeness, inserted by subtle call artifice during induction slumber potential, which might have caused Rogel Dorn himself actual bitter introspection. Word describing these creatures, known consequently as Primaris, metastasized hyperbolically among Imperial astropathic communication networks near instantly timed to revelation sightings. Drastic polarization emerged concerning legitimacy implications, excruciating awareness seldom found within Astartes ranks known exceptionally hardened psyche profiles. Admiration flickered uncertainly alongside visible cautionary apprehension, across Ultra's battlements pervasive agitation visible among more traditionalist chapter brethren, finding such advancement simply unnerving regarding precedent rapidly escalating application, parameters globally absent emperor-defined consultation. What profound shift did their emergence threaten among Lineagekin, referred colloquially revealingly as the Firstborn? Had these newcomers deliberately engineered beyond accepted endurance thresholds, perhaps requiring fractionated healing intervals, Firstborn inevitably suffered embracing Mars weapons reality burn as genetically demanded sacrifice been constructed precisely to forge total replacements systematic? Or did they perhaps signal something desperately awaited, yet profoundly undesired landing, inevitably onto tainted sand, the tangible herald irrevocable evolutionary shift into devastation-era weight replacement happening fleet-scale? Such speculations inevitably seeped poisonous doubt into fraternal bond margins, hitherto impregnable. Acidic whispers lingered into disappointment, near ceremonially silenced immediately within chapters 10,000 years, sustained camaraderie fire solidarity. Accepted doctrines existing sanctified over generations, sensed subtle disquiet unsettling Astartes preparation sanctuaries, even within hallowed precincts of Macragge itself, where rigidity of tactical perfection, maintained defining absolute, invoked tirelessly as exemplary model existing aspirationally galaxy-wide. Reasons underpinning skepticism, multiplied exponentially defined by primal fear, confronting the chilling specter of personal obsolescence, remained compellingly repellent concept unfolding within warrior psyche disciplines, deep-rooted conquering opposition triumphantly transition, managed forcefully via warfare, appropriately parlayed through honorable structure succession, conducted properly ritualized early retirement via passing relic armors onward. This novel scenario invoked replacement, measured seemingly exclusively via superior specifications, inscribed abnormally during sleep cycles, unearned perhaps ready for deliverance, freshly replicated within Genevats below orbital tagmata platforms, entirely possibly prepared, awaiting sufficient surgical replacements, becoming numerically viable impractical consecutive genocide rates occurring continuously. Unwelcome intimation triggered angular response pattern among considerable veterans, fulfilling symbols established feudal Terran structure, sustained perfectly therefore perfectly unnerving. Calgar intuited compound investment, personally affecting significant percentages, chapter strength deep appreciation, vulnerabilities legacy systems existed untouchable currently, thereby assessing necessity tactical mitigation, strategies inevitable alongside essential Imperium advancement, whilst preserving chapter cohesion fractured morale, became arguably Calgarian paramount responsibility, resting undisturbed planetary master for some located intensely entrenched within Fortress of Hera's vaults, irresistible technologically driven adaptation, barely distinguishable from outright chapter annihilation, similarly trenchant resistance, inevitably materializing. Complex expectation hung uniquely upon Calgar's perceptions simultaneously during first witnessing formations, marching exemplifying hitherto impossible robust cohesion, relaying heroic potentials fleet commanders dreamt, resembling fantasy spectacle heroes, occupying vids viewed under youthful layer recollection moments contemplating wartime hagiography. Possibility expanded through technological redemption amidst present corrupted galaxy, representing gravitational well-defining Calgar's measured perception, articulating evaluative summary within silent chapters visible only threaded beneath battle-scarred eyelids unknown scope evolution, nervously contemplated perhaps encountering legendary ancestors offering lifeline. Amidst increasing bleed, unprecedented stresses harming foundations, Imperium desperately needing augmentation, rapidly. Newcomers carrying unknown cost chapter unanimity, incurring silently definitive fracture monumental undertaking, silently enhancing chapter prowess materially, yet simultaneously diminishing chapter stability, immeasurably intangible. Immeasurably complex moment, indeed demanded probable solutions, perhaps still occupying several planetary revolutions, search inward, alongside Primarch Council elusive. Complex contemplation indeed. The arrival of the Primaris Marines, those towering newcomers forged in the Emperor's distant labs, ignited fierce debate within the sacred halls of Macragge's fortress monastery. A low hum of uncertainty vibrated beneath the usual rituals of war preparation. Some battle brothers, their faces etched with the grim exhaustion of endless sieges, saw the newcomers as the Emperor's divine providence, a vital infusion of strength when the shadows across the Imperium lengthened daily, a lifeline thrown across the stars in humanity's darkest hour. Whispers echoed of Guilliman's wisdom, of necessity overriding millennia of stasis. Others, veterans whose loyalty was inscribed within the very stones of the chapter keep, felt a cold dread settle in their guts. To them, the Primaris were not deliverance but desecration, a sharp and dangerous divergence from the holy tenets and immaculate Genocide legacy that had held the galaxy at bay since the founding. The sacred patterns laid down were being rewritten. Was this the start of an unraveling, yet undeniable necessity hung heavy in the air, thick with ozone and sacred incense? The Primaris were here, their bolters already spitting death alongside their brothers, and the galaxy's hunger for warriors was an unending void. As months bled into one another, a pressing question arose, sharp and persistent amongst the command echelons and even the lower decks like the buzz of a damaged auger. Should the existing Astartes, the firstborn, surrender their forms to the scalpel and the agonizing crucible of Belisarian furnace integration? The rumors alone were chilling tales filtering back through the apothecarian spoke of warriors of great strength and renown, who had entered the high-vaulted surgical theaters only for their reinforced biology to violently reject the hypercharged osmodula and sinew coils, their superhuman frames collapsing into biological ash, leaving only bitter echoes and the acrid scent of failure. It was genocide disguised as ascension, murmured some chaplains in confessional tones. But the siren call of enhanced strength, of cellular renewal promising to push back the inevitable entropic decay, of being battle-ready for the centuries of darkness yet to come, was a potent lure, difficult to dismiss amidst the mounting casualty lists blinking on stratagem screens. Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines, a name carved into the annals of courage from Calth to Damnos, was not a leader given to hesitant counsel or prolonged debate when the course was clear. His life was a testament to decisive action, a chronicle etched in bolter scars and the ashes of defeated foes, a man who commanded by stepping into the breach first, whether facing orc hordes on the furnace plains of Armageddon or navigating the treacherous politics of the Senatorum. When the moment came to declare his stance, he made his choice without fanfare, a decision radiating quiet, monumental certainty found in the tilt of his granite jaw. Calgar would submit to the Primaris apotheosis. Not driven by a warrior's craving for augmented might, no base hunger for personal aggrandizement flickered within his warrior's soul. This was duty, pure and absolute, a weight he felt as tangibly as his centuries-old battleplate. To lead these warriors forged from ancient vaults, to truly understand the capabilities surging through their augmented limbs, to embody the unwavering resilience the Ultramarines demanded in an era so fractured, demanded unity. He would stand amongst them, not above them. He would become the symbol, bridging the chasm with his own reforged flesh. The procedure was an eternity carved from pain, a merciless siege upon his already transhuman physiology. Confined within the sterile, blinding glare of the apothecarian sanctum, surrounded by the rhythmic chittering of robotic chirurgeon arms and the thrum of power generators that shook the marrow, Calgar endured, his massive frame clamped within adamantium restraints slick with condensed sweat and coolant fluid. He knew pain, O Emperor. He knew it intimately, the searing kiss of plasma, the crushing weight of ceramite buckling under monstrous blows, the deep, aching throb of bones knitting overnight only to be shattered anew at dawn. Yet this was different, deeper, a cellular rebellion orchestrated within the sanctum's humming embrace. It felt as if his skeleton, hardened by centuries of relentless combat, was being slowly extracted, shattered on some cosmic anvil, then meticulously reforged molecule by agonizing molecule in the heart of a star. On the long, shadowed watch cycles when the pain simulant drips failed to mask the reality, every nerve alight with white-hot agony, even Calgar's legendary resolve felt thin, worn to a fragile thread like ceramite under adamantium claws. Visions flickered, of Guilliman, stern-faced on the Macragge's honor, of battle brothers lost screaming on Nethemus Prime. A treacherous whisper slithered through the torment. Is this the final oblivion? Yet, through tides of suffering that would have sundered lesser souls, he clung fiercely to the rock of his purpose, the unyielding anchor forged in countless war zones, the bone-deep conviction that his sacrifice was required. It was the same unwavering focus that had driven him through the fiery hellscape of Hive Fleet Behemoth's advance, step by bloody step. When the last stim injectors hissed and the final agonizing surges of biointegration faded, leaving behind a profound, ringing silence broken only by the steady beep of vital monitors, Marneus Calgar, standing unsteadily on feet that felt both his and alien, presented himself anew to his assembled captains and the silent scrutiny of the apothecaries. He emerged taller, shoulders broader, the very air around him shimmering with a contained, almost electrical aura of augmented new-forged power, his skin faintly buzzing with latent energy. His physique spoke of impossible density, muscles coiled like hypersprings beneath skin mapped by the familiar, stark lines of ritual scarring and battle-wrought ruin. Yet, as the monks might say, the machine's spirit within, the soul endured unbroken. Beneath the increased stature and thrumming sinew, he remained intrinsically Marneus Calgar. The mosaic of old campaign scars the puckered sigil of a Tyranid bone sword on his cheek. The lattice of lashburns intersecting on his scalp remained stark against the new flesh. The burdens heavy in his heart, the memories of victories bought with rivers of blood and messianic sacrifice, remained unaltered. Most tellingly, his eyes, beneath the ridge of a subtly altered brow, held that precise, laser-focused resolve, steel forged in the deepest fires of war unchanged, unyielding. The significance resonated far beyond the chapter master's personal trial. It was a clarion call for the entire Ultramarines Legion reborn as a chapter, making manifest their sacred credo of adaptability, proving that embracing the necessary evolution Strahmer creates does not equate to spitting on the jeweled histories of Terra. For those brethren who had eyed the Primaris with suspicion, armored walls raised high, Calgar's emergence was the most potent rebuttal. It revealed that the very bulwarks of tradition they revered, leaders whose names were synonymous with stoic endurance and unchanging principle, could find renewed valor, strength, and leadership embodied within the framework of this transformation. It was not rejection, it was an evolution. This new epic under Calgar's command unfolded under twin banners, fearless courage and profound humility. The chapter master walked with his enhanced frame without swagger, fought in the swirling dust of the battlefield with the same implacable resolve, the same unshakable honor, the same bone-deep commitment to shield his brother Astartes, and the virtuous populace of Ultramar that had defined his millennia of service. The Primarch-gifted power was a tool, a sharper blade in his hand, not a reason to look down upon the brothers keeping watch at his flank, breathing through standard patterns. The man beneath the indigo ceramite and the reinforced carapace, forged yet again in pain and dedication, remained. As the Indomitus Crusade carved its blazing scar across the troubled stars, the Legion radiated a reborn determination. The Primaris warriors actively integrated into battle-line doctrine, their enhanced physiologies, reflexes dialed to impossible speeds, and muscle fibers dense like ceramite weave, translated into undeniable battlefield supremacy. Engagements prophesied as Pyrrhic nightmares became controlled exterminations. Xenos monstrosities who had surged against Ultramar's noble garrisons were met not with weary defensiveness but annihilated outright, ground back to the darkness by this hybrid fist of ancient legacy and Belliceran might. Tactical briefings pulsed with confirmed kill rates and secured objectives that spoke volumes. The Primaris were a force multiplier of devastating efficiency. Yet, indomitable spirit remained. Unbreakable honor remained, the shared soul of Ultramar, its warrior creed of self-sacrifice and unyielding protection burning bright within every battle brother, firstborn and Primaris alike, remained untouched by the biomechanical advancements. Guilliman might have sculpted their tools, but the fire within was the sacred flame kindled since the heresy's ashes. Marneus Calgar, now doubly bound a scion of the firstborn legacy, and a vanguard of the reforged future, stood unequivocally as the vital nexus. His very form spoke the reconciling language. His continued leadership was a perpetual sermon preached in steel and enhanced sinew. Adaptation is strength. Tradition could endure except in the way it cannot and persist at all. In the rare moments of stillness salvaged after the thunderous echoes of conquering fury died down, during the ceaseless labors stitching ripped worlds back together, amidst the drifting cloud cover above murdered planets during repairs to standard vessels and sacred vessels alike, Calgar would sometimes pause, gauntlets resting on a parapet slick with rain mirroring the void beyond, his gaze fixed on the distant, tumultuous warp currents. Witnessing how untroubled lesser ships slide through on the Gellerfield's thrum, his mind traversed the long, brutal roads trodden, the impossible challenges etched into subsector histories, the grinding attrition of wars fought blade to chitinous claw pushing back impossible darkness alongside almost 1,000 reactors, and the faces of brothers inscribed forever on the chapter's eternal roll of honor, their sacrifice a crimson thread woven deep into Ultramar's banner. The journey had consumed lifetimes, stretching into antiquity, and its conclusion lay hidden, obscured beyond the curve of countless bleeding stars. But as he stood resolute at the head of his unified legion, surrounded by the quiet strength of warriors bearing the heritage of ancient Terra and the promise of Guilliman's rebirth, a seamless, undivided company of Astartes, that unwavering certainty ignited anew within him. They were prepared. Forged in the crucible of change, tempered by unifying sacrifice, led by one who embodied both the sacred past and the vital present, the Ultramarines faced the tempest ahead. Marneus Calgar drew might not solely from the cellular hum within his remade veins, potent as a plasma core, but from the undying spirit of the Legion itself, a fire that had outlasted gods and empires. As the storm of millennia raged on, whipping the dust of broken worlds into cosmic hurricanes blotting out distant starlight, it was that enduring flame, faithful and unwavering, held high by brothers standing together, forged anew in hope eternal, amidst darkest, void faith armor stealing all souls that would see them through the unmapped devastations still to come.